Manella Chamber. My name is Tim McCarthy, Boston City Council from District 5. I am the chair of the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Committee. We are here today for docket number 0264. Councilors Wu Campbell and myself in order for a hearing regarding the usage of surveillance equipment in the city of Boston. I want to remind everybody that this is a public hearing being recorded and broadcast on Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964. It also can be viewed online, cityofboston.gov. Please silence your cell phones and other devices. We'll take public testimony throughout the hearing. We'd appreciate it if you would sign in to my left, your right, and check off the box if you would like to testify. We have a good crowd, so that people who do testify, you will have 2 minutes on the nose. I'll give you a heads up when you have about 30 seconds left, and at 2 minutes, we'd appreciate if you wrapped it up on 2 minutes to be respectful for everybody's time. And when you do testify, please state your name, your affiliation, your residence, and again, limit your comments to 2 minutes, please. Before I introduce the first panel, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, and if they'd like to have a brief statement. First, the sponsors of this hearing, and then the counselors in order of attendance. First in attendance was Councilor Michelle Wu. Councilor Wu.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just want to thank a whole lot of people who have been educating me on the issues involved here, both in terms of the technologies available, the increasing use of data in all manners of delivering city services, and how to achieve both efficiency and safety from that, but also protection of civil liberties and privacy. So I'm eager to be here to thank our panelists for joining us, and also to set the standard for, or set the framework and the conversation for a longer and larger push to have the legislative backing to what I think is already sort of our common understanding of the need for community input, public accountability, and trust at the core of everything that we're doing at the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Wu. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, and thank you, Councilor Wu, for the partnership in this. Thank you, Superintendent Chief, as well as David from the BRIC, for being here and frankly, continuing to stay in conversation on these issues. They're not black and white, they're complex. I also want to thank the advocates and a lot of young people we've heard from as well for being here. I'm just excited to participate, one, not only to get to a goal of developing, if it's a standard policy or template or something where we go through almost a checklist anytime the department's thinking about introducing a new technology, how do we ensure that the community knows about it, is informed by it, gets an opportunity to participate in some way in the policy development that governs it. How do we strike that balance between the department's need for technology to do its job effectively, while at the same time balancing people's privacy and civil liberties concerns. I think the body cameras, frankly, were a great example of how we did that quite well, working in partnership with the community, different stakeholders, including the ACLU, and we got to a pilot policy where I think 75% of what people agreed on was in it. I thought it was a great example of how we can set up processes to do that for other technologies as well. I know we're probably focused on technologies, but I do want to acknowledge that we did get a lot of emails, and there's a ton of written testimony here about surveillance issues broadly. So that may come up in people's public testimonies or in a couple of questions today. But thank you guys for being here, and thank you to the residents for being here as well.
Thank you very much, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. Thank you, Council President Campbell, Councilor Wu, for holding this hearing. I am interested in learning and hearing more about the city's use of surveillance equipment like drones, social media, observation. I know we all desire a safe city. I think we should be able to have a reasonable policy allowing the protection of civil liberties while also allowing our police force to do its job as well. Just want to thank the panelists for being here, for providing sound leadership for many years on behalf of the residents of the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Janey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also want to thank the makers of this hearing order. Certainly thank you to our panel for all the work that you do and all of the many advocates who have been in touch with us on the City Council. I certainly understand the need to do good police work and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to keep our communities safe. I think there's often a tension between safety and freedom and making sure that our residents are free to live their lives without fear of being watched and overly policed. I think we have a long, deep history in this country and even in this city where poorer communities and communities of color experience police in a very different way. And so I have questions, even some concerns that I would just put out there right up front that I'm hoping that you can let me know your rationale for what your thinking is. But, you know, I worry that our young people, that people who live certainly in the communities that I represent would have I think, a disproportionate burden when it comes to surveillance in our community. And so I just want to put that out there right out front. I'm certainly open to hearing what you have to say, and I want to hear from those who want to testify. I do need to apologize if I have to slip out early. I do have a commitment in my district, but this was very important to me to be present and to hear as much of this hearing as I possibly can. And what I do miss, I look forward to seeing the tape. So thank you again, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councilor Janey. We've also been joined by Councilor Anissa Sabi George and Councilor Matt O'Malley. I would like to recognize that Commissioner Evans had a prior engagement at a conference, or he would be here. My opening statement is simple, Chief. We've had a great relationship for many, many years, and now as the Chair of Public Safety, we meet regularly, we talk regularly, and I appreciate the relationship that you have with my community and with Boston. And I look forward to a really productive conversation about how we continue to protect and to serve and to make sure that people's rights aren't infringed upon, and make sure that our continued efforts in community policing, which is nationally recognized, continues on that road. And I think a lot of that has to do with you, Chief. So I'll turn it over to you right now, Superintendent Chief Willie Gross.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Wu McCarthy, Madam President, and our great councilors of the city. Kind of hit it on the head, sir. Our model of community policing means that that we listen to folks in the community, especially when we implement new technology. As you stated, President Campbell, just like the body-worn cameras, we're looking for the input from the community, suggestions, so we can take that under advisement and move forward in writing a policy that will ensure the rights of everybody in the city of Boston. So I'd like to thank you for convening this hearing on the surveillance technology. And my understanding is this hearing is to look at how policing technology can be adopted in a transparent and open way, those being the key words. As I'm sure you're aware, policing technology changes on a daily basis. And we as a department continue to look for ways to incorporate this technology with the goal of improving our practices to best serve the citizens of Boston. As the department considers technology advancements in policing, we are keenly aware of the concerns that individuals in our communities may have and the common misconceptions around this technology that may exist. That's why these hearings are so important, and we're definitely looking forward to future meetings to further this. This isn't going to be the only meeting that we have, trust me. And again, we appreciate this forum to discuss what technology we use or that we are using now and clear the air. There's a lot of misconceptions, perceptions. We have nothing to hide, and we're perfectly able and willing to discuss our technology. Outside of the formal meetings, the department also utilizes community groups. Everyone knows about our community meetings. And we also rely heavily on the Commissioner's Social Justice Task Force to support an open dialogue regarding areas of concern. And for instance, prior to the body camera pilot and through the council, especially you, Council Campbell, and at the time, Councilor Jackson, and the Social Justice Task Force, we attended in-community meetings to discuss the program and take advice from the community. We plan to use a similar method for our drone policy in the coming weeks. Again, can't stress it enough, this will not be the only meeting that we have. And additionally, the department reviews recommendations from national civil liberties groups and law enforcement best practices to determine technology policy. We understanding that policing technology affects everyone involved and must not undermine privacy protections. There is no devious intent in what we do. We take on new technology to increase the public safety and make sure we are at the cutting edge when it comes to protecting this city. Here with me today is the Bureau of Administration and Technology Superintendent Daly, and also we have David Carabin, the Assistant Chief of Intelligence and Analysis, and he is also the Director of the Boston Regional Intelligence Center. Now I'm going to turn this over to Superintendent Daly to further discuss our technology.
Thanks, Chief. Good afternoon. So I've been with the department for a little bit, and I've seen the technology change over time from mainframe computers and dumb terminals to personal computers and smartphones, mobile devices now. Things are changing and the pace of change is increasing, and so we want to be very conscientious about the technologies that we adopt and how we use those technologies. So the Commission has talked about a number of different technologies, drones for crime scene photography and for special operations assistance, video systems and ALPR to help us solve crimes, mobile devices to smartphones to connect our workforce and to get information out, and ShotSpotter, which detects gunshots in the city and helps us respond quickly to crime scenes. Some other projects that we're working on, we're in the midst of upgrading our radio infrastructure to a digital platform. We're in the beginning stages of a body camera implementation for the department, and we're looking at a new records management system. So these technologies, they make us more efficient, and they give us capabilities that we would not otherwise have. But one thing they all have in common is they collect data. And how we collect that data and what we do with that data, I think, are what's at issue here today. So when we look at a new technology and we try to decide, are we going to adopt that technology? We do all the things you would expect. We do cost-benefit analysis. We look at functionality, value proposition. But, we also look at how the use of a particular technology would be, would it be consistent with the values of the department? And would it further our mission of community policing? And that plays as big, if not a bigger role in our decision-making around technology as, as functions and efficiency increases and things like that. I think we do a good job striking a balance, between how we use data, efficiency, and use of that data. But just in case, I think it's important that we come here and answer questions, and we're happy to do so. We're happy to do so today and at any time in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Good afternoon, council members and community members. My name is David Carabin. I serve as the Assistant Chief of Boston Police Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Analysis and the Director of the Boston Regional Intelligence Center. I prepared a short testimony here, realizing that some people don't know the full scope of what the BRIC is, yet we tend to be questioned a lot on this topic. So I wanted to provide a pretty thorough overview for everybody in the room, as well as the folks that might watch this, and hopefully that will give a better flavor of how the operation functions. So to start, the BRIC is one of 79 fusion centers established across the United States. Infusion centers were developed after 9/11 in recognition of the need for better intelligence sharing and analysis practices as a tool to resolve complex issues related to criminal activity and to protect our homeland from terrorist attacks. In many ways, the development of the BRIC has formalized otherwise informal relationships and information practices that existed within the City of Boston, the Metro Boston region, and across the country. Under the leadership and direction of the Boston Police Department, the BRIC serves as the city's and region's central point for the collection, synthesis, analysis, and dissemination of intelligence to law enforcement, first responders, and private sector security partners. Furthermore, the BRIC is a resource that supports the city's public safety responsibilities by sustaining a trusted network through which information can be collected, maintained, analyzed, and shared in a manner that protects our communities and the privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties of our citizens. The BRIC's major analytical priorities are focused on traditional local crime matters. This includes violent crimes such as homicide, aggravated assault, gun violence, rape, and robbery, violent street gangs, drug trafficking organizations, and both firearms and human traffickers, property crimes such as burglary, larceny, and vehicle crimes, and organized theft groups and their criminal activities to include organized retail theft, organized resale of stolen property, and various financial crimes. Additionally, the BRIC is responsible for evaluating, investigating, and advising on matters that threaten and/or present risks to public safety. This includes threats of terrorism, mass casualty threats of violence, targeted threats of violence, and special events and large crowd events. The BRIC assists the police response to active incidents and investigations and is responsible for providing situational awareness on matters that could impact police operations and public safety. So how do we do it? All major organizations formulate business decisions based on the analysis of data and information relevant to their operational requirements. This is true for major private sector firms, healthcare providers, and nonprofit organizations as well. The same is true for large police agencies such as Boston Police Department. Within Boston Police Department, one of the BRIC's responsibilities is satisfying the department's analytic needs. This includes preparing weekly statistical summary reports and aggregate data for biweekly CompStat meetings, both of which are used for management accountability, police resource deployment, and problem-solving purposes. BRIC personnel analyze lawfully obtained information to identify crime patterns and trends, anomalies in criminal activity, indicators of violence and illegal offenses, and prolific offenders. They evaluate threat information and investigate criminal offenses to include terrorism. The end result of our analytic and investigative processes is the development of intelligence, which by definition is information that has been purposefully collected, analyzed, and shared or presented in a manner to enhance decision-making. Some examples of this: evaluations of the evolution of the tactics, techniques, and procedures used by terrorists so that law enforcement, first responders, and security personnel can prevent and mitigate the risks presented by a terrorist attack. Analysis of gang feuds and the likely targets and locations of retaliatory violence in order to advise police deployments to prevent violence. Analysis of the modus operandi related to a crime series or criminal offenders, coupled with details surrounding target selection and the vulnerabilities exploited for purposes of guiding police investigations and community awareness campaigns. Assessments of the size, scope, and context of special events or mass crowd events in order to assist public safety in preparing for and preventing the event from outside threats. Evaluations of the impact of opiates in Boston's communities, along with the identification of new synthetic derivative drugs and illegal trafficking methodologies used to form investigative and public health strategies. Contrary to what Hollywood might suggest, intelligence is not synonymous with secrets. Again, intelligence is the end result or product of information that has been prioritized, gathered, and analyzed, and this is ultimately shared to inform decision makers. The entire intelligence cycle of prioritizing, gathering, analyzing, sharing, and evaluating is implemented specifically for the purpose of assisting decision makers and/or answering questions related to relevant public safety threats or problems. Intelligence produced by the BRIC, however, is often restricted from public disclosure in order to protect the privacy rights of victims, witnesses, individuals suspected of or charged with criminal offenses, and to protect the sensitivities of ongoing law enforcement investigations and security plans. The protection of such information is done in accordance with state and federal law, local ordinances, and department policy, and BRIC personnel are all trained accordingly. The BRIC also supports data preparation and analysis for department research projects, provides data and finished analyses in response to both public and intergovernmental requests for information, and provides data and analyses to support non-governmental organizations providing health and human services to Boston's communities. As far as experience, training, and technology go, the BRIC's sworn personnel are thoughtfully selected and come from backgrounds rich in experience from various investigative assignments and uniform duties. Their diversity is reflective of the communities we serve, and each has served for many years providing community policing in a multitude of city neighborhoods. All of the BRIC's analytic personnel have secondary educations, and most have obtained or are actively obtaining master's degrees and other forms of postgraduate level education. Each has been trained in the applicable laws, policies, and procedures relevant to their work responsibilities, and all receive specialized training in analytic methodology, tradecraft, and subject matter on an annual basis. All training adheres to policies, standards, and recommendations developed by the Massachusetts Department of Criminal Justice Information Services, our nation's numerous major law enforcement associations, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, U.S. Department of Justice, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And considerations for the protection of privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties is included in nearly all training curriculums. The combination of sworn and civilian expertise and perspectives in the work conducted at the BRIC lends to high standards, accuracy, accountability, and quality. Technology plays an important role in supporting the work of BRIC personnel. It is important that intelligence professionals are equipped with the right tools to effectively and efficiently perform their duties and produce meaningful and useful intelligence. Analysts in the BRIC rely on a variety of technologies to support their responsibilities. Our selection and application of technology is a result of identified best practices nationally and laws, policies, guidance, and recommendations from the U.S. Department of Justice. The majority of technologies used by the BRIC are for managing, querying, analyzing, annotating, and visualizing qualitative data and relational data sets. The vast majority of the information and data used for analysis comes from internal police reporting mechanisms, lawfully collected police data sources, and intelligence shared by other law enforcement agencies in accordance with law and policy. Other information and data used is collected from publicly available sources, such as media publications, internet, public government reports and data, professional and academic publications, and commercial data sets. In closing, I'd like to reflect on some successes for which the BRIC has been recognized for. The BRIC is identified nationally and internationally as a model for law enforcement information sharing and analysis, and its personnel are held in very high regard by law enforcement and public safety communities alike. The BRIC has been the recipient of several national level awards, to include Fusion Center of the Year, and recognitions for its exceptional services in demonstrating best practices to the nation. Individually, both sworn and civilian personnel have received honors from international, national, and local law enforcement organizations, to include International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Fusion Center Association, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Massachusetts Association of Women in Law Enforcement, and the Boston Police Detectives Benevolent Society, to name a few. The men and women of the Boston Regional Intelligence Center are dedicated to their profession, and it's reflected daily through their tireless efforts to support the City of Boston's public safety needs. Since the BRIC's inception, the City of Boston has experienced steady decreases in crime annually. Boston is a safer city today because the BRIC's assistance in threat mitigation, the identification of offenders in geographic locations where crime is occurring, which results in more effective allocation of police resources to specifically address crime and quality of life issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for that very thorough introduction. Appreciate that. For the record, we've been joined by my good friend and colleague, Councilor Michael Flaherty. My first question is really quick. Last social justice task force meeting, we talked about the use of drones and the reconstruction of crime scenes. Could you talk about a little bit about, first of all, the policies of other cities and towns and states about their drone technology, and then secondly, walk us through a crime scene, how that would happen. A crime happens, and then what the procedure would be, if you don't mind.
Sure. It's no problem. As pertains to other cities and towns across our great nation, we look forward to reviewing their policy and how they implement their drone technology. I know we have some cities and towns here in Massachusetts, and So far, the way we've witnessed their utilization is when they've had missing persons with complications or, for instance, like felons fleeing into the woods, where we can use the drone technology and infrared technology to help locate those individuals. Now, as to your question about crime scene management, so here's the breakdown. If there's a crime, let's just say if there's a death, if there's a homicide, the police respond, and we set up a crime scene with the yellow tape, and we set up a perimeter. Unfortunately, if it is a homicide, we cannot remove the body if it's pronounced dead on scene. That's a part of the investigatory process of the district attorney. He has the right to remove the body, and only he has that right. That can only be done after the facilitation of the crime scene has been done, after the investigation has been done. And we've seen tragedies outside of the Commonwealth where a body's been left on scene too long, and unfortunately, they didn't have the ability to communicate what was going on, and that led to tragedies. Here in Boston, we're very transparent. We let everyone know about the process of the crime scene and what we're doing. One of the things that we use to help facilitate the investigation is aerial shots. And unfortunately now, if we need an aerial shot, we'd have to climb atop a building, or we'd have to call in the fire department to raise the ladder, and we'd have to send up officers and investigators to take aerial photography. What we're looking to do with drone technology is to help us facilitate crime scene management, so that if somebody's, some person, a loved one, whatever, is on that scene, 1 or 2 minutes is too long, but we want to help facilitate this so we can remove that body as soon as possible. And as pertains to missing persons, especially missing with complications, it would be children and the elderly. It's not like TV. Not everyone gets lost in the city. There's often times where people get lost in parks and other sections of our great city, since it's Franklin Park, golf courses, the park areas. And again, we would utilize drone technology to help identify those individuals and bring them home safely.
Thanks, Chief. I know some of my colleagues came in a little late. We're going to keep it really tight, so one question with a follow-up from everybody would be great. We'll do a couple of rounds if need be, but I know that people are, just respectful of everybody's time, if you would. Councilor Wu.
I'm going to do a multi-part question.
See, and then it begins, right?
I'm gonna try to
I just
pack it.
said one
I'm gonna
and one.
fit 5 into 1. So first, I want to thank Commissioner Evans, even though he's not here, because I've had a conversation with him about surveillance and accountability and oversight, and particularly the idea of some sort of policy, to have a policy in place many times, and he's always been incredibly supportive, has always cited the benefits and the fact that there's a better result after doing that in partnership with Councilor Campbell and others on the council around body cameras. So my one question is, what policies are in place now at the department proactively, and not just retroactively, but ahead of time, before the purchase or use of any potential new surveillance technology to guide that decision-making? Are there any standards in place around community input, data retention, any kind of checklist things that are similar to what came about through the Social Justice Task Force?
Okay.
Yes, so I think it falls into different categories. So if it's a new type of technology, so body cameras is a new type of technology, drones are a new type of technology, but we focus on what that technology produces. Does it produce data, and what are we going to do with that data? How are we going to use that data? In many cases, for video, ALPR, we have retention policies that exist that we apply to any new technology that we bring in. For other kinds of data, I think it depends on...
Sorry, ALPR is the license plate recognition?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it is. So we have a 30-day retention policy, and we stick to that policy. We apply that policy to video, to ALPR data, to basically any data that we're collecting proactively out in the field that is not pursuant to an investigation. Other data that, data that comes in on police reports and things like that, there are existing laws that guide how we handle that data, how long we retain it, how we restrict its use. So we do have policies, laws. We apply the Fourth Amendment when there's an expectation of privacy in data. So we do have a framework that we rely on, a policy framework for how we use the data we have.
So given that framework, or is there something within that framework that would protect against or prevent or after the fact kind of hold accountable if there was a deviation from the usage of that surveillance? So take the example of drones and documenting crime scenes. If somehow, what's to prevent the department without any formalized sort of external policy from using that on a protest or just over someone's home? Or what's the framework? How does the framework apply to that?
So we do have an audit and review group within the police department, and they're responsible for, ensuring that there's internal compliance with policy. Particularly in the case of the drones that you mentioned, it would be a deviation from policy that, would be addressed that way. If it was an evidence gathering, would be subject to, Fourth Amendment issues as far as that goes. But most of the internal policies that we have would be enforced internally through, through compliance, through audits.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Wu. Just a quick point I have to make, that we do have to follow the fire codes. So if you're sitting in the stairs, you can't. You need to find a seat. So if everybody over there could scooch over and say hi to your neighbor as close as possible. Everybody needs to be sitting. And if you're not sitting, we have the Curly Room, which is located right behind this wall, where we have a TV, and you can watch the hearing. And you won't miss your time if you get called to testify. So everybody get in a friendly spot. Thanks so much for cooperating. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. So just to follow up on a couple of Councilor Wu's points, I too want to thank Commissioner Evans. When this was scheduled, he did have this conference, and I know he's going to continue to follow this. And like you said, Chief, this is the one of many conversations. I think it's important that we at least get on the same page about the importance of establishing an ordinance of some sort to address this issue. I said this at the last Social Justice Task Force meeting, that the body cameras were a great example of us putting forth a policy that was community informed. People had an opportunity to weigh in. Even those folks who didn't want the technology but said, okay, it's coming, how can I still weigh in some way, in a meaningful way? So that was helpful, but obviously all of us aren't gonna be here, or at least I won't, in maybe 10 years or so. So how do we make sure that we have something that is on the books, that is consistent, transparent, that addresses this need to strike a balance between new technologies that the department uses that serves legitimate purposes, also with the privacy concerns of the public, and also just making sure that people are aware of what we're doing. I think some folks show up at our offices angry and upset because they just had no idea that some technology was going to be rolled out. I'm a firm believer in looking this way, not pointing the finger that way. And so if we have done that, we need to acknowledge that and always admit that we can do better. I think I just have one question to maybe set the conversation, or to add to the conversation, which is, what technologies are currently being used by the department? And this may be a long list, and if it is, I think if we could get that in writing in some way to be able to share with folks. But what technologies? Obviously, body cameras is coming, drones, we talked about, license plate readers. So what technology is currently being used by the department?
So that's actually a very hard question, because blurring the line, technology is everywhere. From watches to, and So when it rises to the level of, you know, that we're using it to collect data, I think, you know, that's an easier list. So that is.
Let's start with that list.
Okay, so.
Yep.
It begins with the 911 system. When someone calls 911, that creates an entry in a database that allows us to respond. We have a computer-aided dispatch system that works with the 911 system. It passes the data to that, and that, you know, tracks the location of the police cars or the ambulance or the fire truck as it responds, and keeps track of the response times and things like that. If on the police side there is an incident to be recorded, then another record is created in the records management system, the police records management system. And the police records management system has multiple modules. It has one for incident reports. It helps us to manage case investigations. We have an FIO module in there. We have an evidence tracking module. So that is sort of a big system that does handles a lot of the business for the police department. There are other systems in the crime lab. They have you know, technology systems. The BRIC has some systems that they manage data with. There are a lot of, you know, desktop-based systems that people do analysis within specific units, but the data for that mostly comes from the systems that we've already mentioned.
Are we currently using drones or license plate readers, body cameras, obviously?
Yes, yes. So drones, we haven't really rolled out yet, and they won't be collecting data in the same sense. We will be using those for still photography and video at a crime scene, but we won't have that drone up just patrolling and collecting data that's not associated with an existing event. ALPR does fall into that category where it just sits and records data, and that data, as I mentioned, is retained for 30 days. If an investigation is underway and there is data in the system relevant to that investigation, and that data is retrieved from the system within that 30 days, it goes into a different bucket into the investigative system. But if that doesn't happen, that data goes away after 30 days.
So I'll just add, just in the interest of time, I think obviously as these conversations continue and we think about what technology an ordinance should apply to, what is the criteria, right? What are the factors that we look at to determine which technologies should we be talking about, which technologies should sort of be covered by an ordinance, I think is a big part of the question.
We also have ShotSpotter technology.
That's right.
That's another one. And just like with body-worn cameras, we want the inputs before we write policy. We want to know everybody's opinion about what's too intrusive or not. And I think that's the way to go. And the city council here, folks, is a great checks and balance system to make sure we're on track. And again, we look forward to having meetings to get folks' input.
And establishing some standards. Thank you, Councilman.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Evans?
I'll echo my colleagues who also thank you for coming here today. I think it's part of a very important conversation. I just want to go out and say I firmly believe it's the right, if not responsible, for our responsibility of government to make sure that those who are watched get to also watch how they're being watched. And so I want to be very clear that I'm here because I want to talk to you about how we're going to create that system of checks and balances that you just talked about. And I'm really excited about your partnership and making sure that we design one to make sure that we, again, are watching how we're being watched and we're very transparent. I think the words you used were about transparency and openness. I would also add to that list consent from those who are being watched. So when it comes to, I'll just say two quick questions. One is to the Boston Police Department, and that is, do you have any objections to actually coming to the city council for direct approval for any additional surveillance equipment, any additional surveillance policy, all of that to come to us before you purchase, borrow, or use anything going forward as a general policy. And then when it comes to BRIC and the representative, do you have any objections to giving us annual reports of how we have been watched, all the phone calls, all the social media, all of the any emails that you have observed, just numbers, just telling us exactly at this moment an annual report or biannual report showing us how much you've been watching, at least those in the city of Boston. So those 2 direct questions.
Okay. For the first, I think any of our purchases has to come through City Hall.
Well, it comes as a budget,
Right,
right? But I mean,
right.
as you specifically are going to be looking at, I don't
We
know,
are perfectly
infrared
willing to
cameras
have
or
those
things like that.
discussions and to let you know why we think that technology is necessary, especially as pertains to domestic preparedness. Our city's been attacked twice by terrorism, and so we always want to be ahead of the game, and anything that will help ensure the safety of the citizens, we're perfectly willing to have that discussion, ma'am.
To come to us and
Yes.
seek our approval.
Yes.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Ma'am, that's my boss, so,
Yes.
yeah, so I
Yeah.
echo his sentiments. Whatever's deemed appropriate by the department will become a policy that I abide by.
So the question for you was about the annual reports, though, the
Exactly.
numbers, so.
Sure, so that could be possible. I think it just depends on how it is that we structure whatever the policy is for coming up with that and developing it.
And I'm glad you asked that question because we don't want to make any purchases where anyone thinks that we're trying to sneak in technology, right, and to be too intrusive. We're keenly aware of George Orwell, Big Brother's watching, and we don't want to be that type of brother.
Thank you. I'll wait for the second round.
All right. Thank you. Before I hand it over to Councilor Flynn, we do have some rules in the council hearing regarding clapping, snapping, stomping, yelling, and signs as well. So if you can lower signs, no snapping, no clapping. If you want to give a thumbs up, you can go ahead, but it's a bit intimidating when people are clapping and snapping. So we do have a rule in the hearing not to do that. So I appreciate your efforts. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Council McCarthy. Chief, I just had one question. Is there any example that you could give us in your career, maybe over the last several years, where ShotSpot or drones or license plate readers have helped you or helped the Boston Police solve a crime and benefit the community? Just give us an example of the effectiveness of some of these
Sure.
tools.
Sure. Well, we began with ShotSpotter technology. Before that technology was available, before we placed sensors throughout the city to help us identify where firearms were being discharged, we were kind of our own ShotSpotters. You'd have to guess. Or we get a call to 911 saying shots were fired in this area. Well, under the ShotSpotter technology, it's able to locate where the shots are being fired within 25 feet. That's very important as pertains to deployment. Before we deploy several cars to the area to try to find out where those shots were being discharged from and to locate ballistics evidence. So ShotSpotter technology allows us to respond to that immediate area, not send in 4 or 5 cars to that one immediate area, but to kind of set up a perimeter to hopefully catch someone fleeing from that area. So that technology is very important. And also, when we do make an arrest, we kind of have that documented, and we have technicians from ShotSpotter that are available to help testify to bring a case through to fruition. Kind of the same things for license plate recognition. If a crime occurs in an area, it doesn't have to be shots. It could have been somebody that unfortunately struck an individual, you know, a motor vehicle homicide. And those cameras would be set up in certain areas, so if somebody had a partial registration plate, we'd able to, hopefully that would be captured on camera. As for drones, we haven't implemented that yet, and we definitely have to have more meetings to get the opinions of everyone here. And first, to educate people about how we want to implement them. I've already spoken to several folks, I can't say here, but I'm always talking to folks in the community, and I've already heard some things that, like, wow, we never said we use drones that way. I've talked to people that literally think we're going to have drones following them around. If you get outside of a function at a high school, we're going to have drones following you around. That is not our intent at all. So I look forward to the meeting so we can educate the city of Boston about how we want to implement the drones, and of course, facilitate that checks and balance system so that we're not too intrusive, and we do have input before policy is implemented.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Janey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly want to again say thank you. The last time the commissioner was here, I was able to thank him personally for the work that he's done. Certainly want to extend that to you, Chief,
Thank
and
you.
members of your team. You know, as I mentioned, this is really about striking that balance of how we don't fall down the slippery slope of infringing upon people's their civil liberties and their rights, right? And how we keep our communities safe at the same time. You know, communities of color, whether we're talking about poor folks, Muslims, our immigrant brothers and sisters, we need to make sure that we're all safe. You know, I appreciate your commitment around transparency and being open. I think that's very important. The fact that you want to come before this body around purchases, I think that's very important. Just to follow up on a question I heard earlier, I think it was the superintendent mentioned the internal review around an audit, and I'm just wondering how we really incorporate community control and make sure beyond the city council that we're having more of these conversations where people, residents in our city, the community can come and hear the reports and hear what's happening. How do we incorporate that it's not just an internal body that is looking at the data and looking at when surveillance is being used and how it's being used, but how do we kind of open up the process so there really is transparency?
So in some cases, if it's a violation of internal policy, you know, we do have that audit and review group. But if it's something that's a legal violation, a rights violation, or, you know, something that, you know, that causes a case not to be prosecuted, or, you know, if it's some improper use of technology, those are usually public. Those are all in the record in the courts.
So to clarify, though, you're saying that audit review team is an internal team. And I
Yes.
guess, for me, my question is, how do we ensure that there's more community control in this process, that residents have the opportunity to really understand fully how surveillance is being used, when, why, and have an opportunity to kind of weigh in? And I don't know if it's, you know, regular council meetings. I'm certainly hopeful that after this hearing that we have the opportunity to really think this through with some working sessions as we try to shape, you know, some sort of policy or ordinance around really looking at this. But I guess what I'm interested in is just following up on what Councilor Edwards mentioned, is really how do we make sure that the community is an active partner in this?
Sure. I think I was focusing in the wrong area. So I think as far as how we use technology, what technology we're using, what data we're gathering, that's all guided by our policy. And our policies should be open and open to the public and open for scrutiny. Sometimes new technologies can push the boundaries of existing policies, and that's when I think we should have a much more deliberative public process, like we do with the body cameras, where we look at, you know, how this new technology, something emerging, is going to push the boundaries of an existing policy, and then we can have those discussions.
And it'll be led by you, Counselor. You are representing your constituency, so we can definitely have those conversations. And education is key when you're discussing new technology. If you don't educate your constituency, if we don't educate the people that we serve, then it's going to be led by stereotypical views and negative perceptions. So the type of meetings that you're looking to have will help educate everybody about how they're being served. And by what measure? So
I
looking
can
forward to that.
appreciate that. And I know that there are many folks here, as you can see in this room, who have taken the time to educate themselves. I think really just making sure that there's a real partnership is important to me, and I'm happy to think about how we move forward through, whether it's working sessions, whether it's community meetings with you. I'm happy
Sure.
to do that. I just want to make sure that people have a seat at the table. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Chair.
Counselor.
Thank you.
Counselor Anissa Sabi George?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here and everyone who's in the audience today. Just a few questions, just to follow up on Councilor Janey's line of questioning. Who is on the audit and review group, your internal group? Who sits on that?
It's a full unit. I don't have the names of everyone in that unit, but
All sworn members?
yes. And they're responsible not just for technology, but general compliance with policy. And they're within the Internal Affairs Group.
Oh, within it,
Yes.
and are they reviewing, what types of cases are they reviewing? Everything that IA gets, or what are they reviewing? And are they reviewing anything in particular, or are they overviewing, auditing everything?
They're responsible for internal compliance with policy, so that would encompass everything. But I'm sure they do spot checks, random checks, or they do focused audits.
And are the results of those audits ever presented for public consumption?
I don't know that.
Because I would wonder how much of that we could actually learn from in order to improve practice at BPD. I think it's really important if we're talking about our response as a city to a snowstorm, or we're talking about a response to something that's happened within your department, whether we're talking about something that's happened at Boston Public Schools, which is my favorite.
The findings of the
That's-
investigations are made public.
Of the audit reviews, though, as well?
Well,
Where
I
they go
will-
back? Okay,
Yes.
great, that'd be great. So,
And I will definitely follow up and clarify that for you, so there's no confusion about it whatsoever.
right, and then how are cases put before the audit and review group? Is it random, or is it suggested by somebody?
It's a combination of inputs, either a problem's identified, but a problem is suspected but not identified. I think there are a number of different ways to make a referral to that group.
Right, as I think, I wonder in the medical field, when they decide to do sort of a intensive look at a particular case, how are they choosing that case? Sometimes it's done randomly, but I think having a method to the process is really important, both from a research perspective and an audit perspective, but then also, I think, as a way to make sure that you're capturing a healthy and appropriate sampling of the different types of cases that might come before that group.
Absolutely.
Great, I think that's it for me. I know we're limited to one question, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
All who come and join us this afternoon. I think the sheer numbers of people in the hall today and those that are following online shows what an important issue this is. And I know, as has been said by my colleagues, that we all, obviously, a paramount goal is protecting folks' civil liberties and making sure that we can run as transparent a process as possible. For my first question this round, though, Chief, and anyone else can jump in, can you talk a little bit about the uniqueness of Boston, that we are I would say, a world-class city, a major American city. We have certain events, July 4th next week, we had the marathon several months ago, ways newer technology is used to make sure members of the public are safe at those large-scale events that occur. It could be the Women's March last year, it could be a whole host of things.
Yes, well, you hit it on the head. Boston is unique, and historically, this country itself began here in Boston, and it began because people wanted their rights protected, so we're keenly aware of that as well. But Boston, we have a winning city, so to speak. So despite our Patriots parades, Red Sox, Bruins, Celtics, we have other special events that take place. The Women's March that you mentioned, that's 175,000 people. And that's 175,000 people that we have to protect and make sure their rights are protected as well. Boston is a huge metropolis when it comes to institutions for higher learning. the best businesses in the world, all right, and a historical site. So our population can grow from 650,000 to 1.4 million a day. And the reason for mentioning this is that we have to stay ahead of the curve on how we protect the citizens of Boston. So, for example, or by example, we went from a horse to a car, from a call box to a radio, from written reports to computerized reports, meaning that we're always looking to improve the department. And the improvements sometimes come through inevitable technology, whether it's camera systems, updated computers, updated telecommunication. When you have a metropolis such as ours that is successful, and we host many events, including the marathon, we have to stay ahead of the curve, and that's why we're always looking to make sure that we have the best equipment available to protect our city. And another example, the Boston Marathon, we never thought that that marathon would be bombed, and we lost the lives of a child, civilians, and officers. And those are teachable moments for us. And we'd love to use any type of technology to ever prevent something like that from ever happening again. And we're keenly aware, again, that any new technology needs to be discussed with the citizens of Boston and facilitated by the City Council.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Chief and Superintendent, and appreciate you taking the time to be here. Chief, you and I have had multiple discussions over the years about civil liberties, community policing, crime stats, prevention and intervention, clearance rates, body cameras, shot spotter, bringing back the mounted unit, and everything included. So I find you to be arguably probably one of the most accessible and approachable, fair and honest chiefs that the city's ever had on the Boston Police Department. So, and I also know that you're citywide, you're everywhere, because I'm citywide and I see you everywhere, and you have lots of conversations with lots of people. I just really want to get a sense, and really also as an African-American male, like what are you hearing from the public? I know that there are folks that have major concerns, and some don't want the surveillance cameras whatsoever and feel it's an infringement. And then, just yesterday, Councilor Flynn and I met with mothers from the 3 public housing developments in South Boston, multi-ethnic group of women who very much want to see more police presence, more foot patrols. They want shot spotter. They would like to have surveillance because they're fearful of things that are going on within the developments, but they're also fearful for their kids. They want to make sure that their kids are sort of not going down the road of getting involved with gang activity and drug activity. So it's sort of a we can have this discussion, and you're going to get, I guess, a diversity of opinion on it.
Yes, sir.
But I put a lot of value in your experiences because you are approachable, you are accessible, and you have these conversations in every corner of the city. And I'd really like to get a sense from you as to, like, what are people saying to you? And that's from our youth and kids in our school and our seniors and everybody in between. What do they want? What do they want? Are they okay with this?
I'm happy to answer because I have been talking to a lot of people, especially about body-worn cameras and then drone technology. Then it got out there, and then, again, stereotypical views and perceptions. But what I like about the citizens of Boston, they don't hold back when they talk to me.
Well, let me tell you how it is. We all know that.
So we'll address the most serious. There's nothing like the loss of a loved one. So when I speak to parents, brothers and sisters that have lost loved ones, they want whatever technologies is available to catch whoever is responsible for that. And what can you say to that person except that we'll utilize whatever we have to utilize, but we have to be fair to everyone else. But as pertains to people being shot and violent crime and helping to identify people that are pressing those numbers, and it's not everybody, it's 1 or 2%. So people want that technology, but again, we have to be fair. We have to strike that balance. As you look about the chambers today, I know I congratulated everyone back here, and I mean it, because I didn't forget where I came from. I was a young black man. I didn't even like police then, but I was educated. And I felt as though police were too intrusive at the time and didn't have my rights at heart. So I'm keenly aware of where I came from and where I'm at now and in my role. So when I talk to the young people, thank you for using your voices of logic and representing how you feel about your liberties and how you feel about your rights in the United States, especially here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. When I talk to the youth, they just want to make sure that they can go about the city and not be followed. Like no one's following them around with cameras or drones, or if they look up with drones over their head, or if they're somewhere like downtown Crossing, all of a sudden you see a drone or someone sneaking around with the camera. They see what's happening outside of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They see what's happening across our great nation. And I'm very proud when I am approached by the young people in the city who are telling me how they feel. And so the young folks that I've talked to, they just don't want drones following them around, especially if they look a certain way, dress a certain way, or speak a certain way. They do not want to be stereotyped. So with BPD, they want to ensure that we're not stereotyping and that we're not violating anyone's rights and that we're not going to play the blame game just because of where you came from, what you look like, or what your opinion is. I'll close it with seniors. I love seniors. They have no filter. So they really tell you, your grandmothers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles, they really tell it like it is. And I really like talking to the seniors because you have to educate them about the technology. And I think that's beneficial for everyone. Everyone assumes we know about drones. We assume we know everything about cameras. But one thing I learned about the seniors that aren't as privy as we are to modern technology and what we know about it, I really do like explaining step by step by step so they get it. Because they are the matriarchs and patriarchs of the families who are going to explain things when we're not there. Just from those three groups alone, those are the issues and concerns that I've heard. And especially from the young folks, I know one thing, they want their voice to be heard. And they want to be included in the discussion. They don't want to think that the city council or the Boston Police are the ones dictating policy to them without hearing their voice. So that's what I've heard, sir.
Good, and I know your head and your heart's in the right place. I obviously trust the commissioner, and I trust your ability as well as superintendent and the rest of your team. No one's perfect. BPD makes mistakes. City councilors make mistakes. Everyone, quite frankly, makes mistakes. But I think it's the continued working together to sort of move our city forward, which I think is a large part of our success on the community policing side, but also we're a model across the country. We're not perfect, but we're blessed that we haven't had those incidents. And just finally, we all know, and I think you actually, we might have been together when this happened, but we were in the Dorchester Day Parade. It was either last year or the year before, and there were actually drones along the parade route, and they weren't ours. They weren't BPD's.
No.
It was so, and I think folks should know that anyone has access. I guess you probably buy the things on the internet, right? But everyone has access to these, and they have them, and they're flying them around. So for whatever it's worth, I mean, that's where we're going on the technology side. And something I talked to the police commissioner about last week, and we've had a rash of car breaks and folks walking into people's hallways and going onto their porches, stealing their packages. And people are less inclined to call 911 these days and more inclined to upload the video from their porch or from their home surveillance camera on Facebook, and then it just goes crazy viral, you know? So we have folks that are a little worried about, I guess, infringement and privacy, but we're seeing it on I can go onto Facebook now, and there's gonna be someone in my neighborhood stealing a package or breaking into a car that got caught last night on someone's surveillance camera. They don't want to take time to go down to C6, to fill out a report, to meet with a detective,
Right.
take time off of work. So, and they kind of feel a little embarrassed, maybe they left their car open, or maybe they should have taken the package in. So instead of just having it invade sort of, you know, their life, they just upload it. And then it goes crazy, and everyone, then next thing you know, names, oh, that looks like, you know, that looks like Ross, that looks like Flaherty. And then the chatter starts, and then lo and behold, there's an apprehension based on Facebook.
Right.
That's where we're going. So
And
we're going.
sometimes they apprehend the wrong person,
True.
the community is
True.
not such and
Yeah,
such, it's someone that looked like
yeah,
them.
and it's a balance we're working, but also, it's it should noteworthy that the shot spotter started from this body. My former colleague and former city councilor, Rob Consavo, literally brought shot spotter here, and that sort of gun acoustic technology started in a hearing just like this here, and it was implemented, and it was a very helpful tool to at least differentiate between backfiring cars, fireworks, and actually a firearm discharge. And then the circle starts as to if someone was on foot, they were on a bike, or they were on a car, as to what direction they could have fled. That has actually helped lead to apprehensions. And having had a relative, murdered violently, nothing like, an arrest and conviction of someone that has stole someone from your family. And when justice prevails, on behalf of the family, that loved one's not coming back in the door, but you feel like you've done your job in preserving and respecting sort of their worth and their memory, and you partner with the police department, and you try to give them whatever information you can that can lead to an apprehension and/or arrest and conviction of your loved one, and you want it done right. Any misstep along the way, can lead to an acquittal or not even being able to charge someone. And so it's critical particularly for the victims of violent crime and their families, that we do the best we can to engage and have at our disposal every piece of technology. We're in a CSI world these days. Everyone thinks that the crime's going to be solved in that sort of gotcha moment, but at the end of the day, you need community participation. You need witnesses, you need descriptions, you need license plate numbers, you need clothing, colors, all of it is part of how we can continue to work together. So my hope is that out of this discussion, we'll continue to make strides on all fronts, and we'll continue to work together. But I trust your judgment on it, because I know that you have, you give people your ear, you give them your attention, and that means a lot to me citywide. So appreciate your time.
Thank you, Counselor. We'll continue to listen and have discussions.
And you do a great job at it. So thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. We'll quickly go through another round if need be. My quick question would be something that we talked about at the Social Justice Task Force meeting. Councilor Flaherty brought up Shot Spotter, which is very effective, not only to help the community, but certainly to help the police officers, knowing what type of weapon was fired, what they're ready to engage. If it was a firecracker or not, they know they're not going into a situation where they're in danger. We can keep police officers calm going into the situation, or get them on high alert if they do need be. Can you talk a little bit about what we talked about briefly with, I think it was the New York police, that have technology of cell phones that were given to them with shot-spotted technology, so every police officer has shot-spotted technology on their body, which may, in the long term, save somebody's life and/or capture somebody more quickly.
So New York Police Department has equipped all of their officers with smartphones, for smartphone technology, Some of the same applications that they have on their computer-aided dispatch in their cars, or their mobile data terminal in their cars, rather. Now you can have it on a cell phone. Now, as pertains to ShotSpotter, once someone discharges a firearm in the city of Boston, it's located by a sensor, then that's immediately reported to a dispatcher, who then types it out to the officer's mobile data terminal, as well as broadcasts it out. That's a delay. I have ShotSpotter technology on my phone. The instant that a shot is detected, it goes off on my phone. And instead of an officer waiting to get that information, he or she will immediately have that ShotSpotter information, and they may be right in that area. So it's a more efficient deployment as a result of everyone having that immediate technology at the tips of their fingers. And it's worked very well in New York, and we're looking to implement that here. Everyone uses their smartphones anyway. So what you have on your mobile data terminal, you can also have at your hands here, and also different applications. John, would you like to add more as well?
Just to add one thing, the officer on the smartphone application for ShotSpotter can actually play back those shots. They get a lot more detailed information. In the past, there would be a dialogue back and forth to the dispatcher, where was it exactly relative to this tree? The officer now can look on his phone, see where those shots were registered, and then play back those shots to listen if it was a automatic fire or semi-automatic, large caliber, small caliber. So it gives them a lot more information.
And as well, there's a geo map too. So we hit the location where the shots are, you get a Google Earth view. You can actually follow the areas, elongate your search, and you have a picture of that area. So you'll know if it's an apartment building, in an alleyway, right, or in a park, you will know. As well, as the superintendent alluded to, you have much more information at hand. The ShotSpotter technology will go from 24 hours to 3 days to 7 days. So you're actually able to go back and look at the patterns of shots in those areas. And that's definitely instrumental to officer safety as well as civilian safety, that we're able to have that technology at hand for better deployment.
Great. I'm certainly looking forward to those meetings. Councilor Wu.
Can we have more than one question this round?
Uh-oh.
She left so she could get all the questions in order.
So and I'm sorry if you already covered this, I had to do the quick daycare in and out and handoff. Could you talk a little bit about information sharing, particularly databases that are beyond Boston that the department currently feeds intelligence into or receives it from?
Director?
Feel that, Dave? USC?
Yeah, sure. So as far as databases that the BRIC or the department feeds data into, we have some shared information systems, but we don't actively populate other databases that have implications beyond the city of Boston. We share information to law enforcement through a variety of mechanisms and to other partners. Through the processes that I described before, we produce some type of an analytic product that might provide a description of like the who, what, when, where, how, and why of a circumstance related to crime. And then depending on the nature of that and who that information is applicable to, we will share that with either a very narrow group of law enforcement, depending on the sensitivities that are included. If it is not that sensitive, but it is more for general awareness or perhaps for some type of general public safety or protective purposes, we redact information to protect privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties, to make sure that we do not divulge investigative details that could impact an investigation. And then we might send that out to a broader audience. Something like that might include other public safety officials involved in the initial response to an incident or protection of an incident. Things that might have national implications, we would send that then to a broad audience that has both a right and a need to know, and according to law, is able to view that information. So there's something, and John, you can allude to this a little bit more. We call it CJIS, Criminal Justice Information Systems, right? There are a lot of laws and policy around how that type of information can be shared. Some of that might be what's called CORI-sensitive information, criminal offender registry information. And once we start getting into the details of personal identifiable information, the breadth in which we can share information is reduced substantially because it can really only be shared with those that are authorized to see it.
And most of the time, is this a case-by-case decision in terms of each individual piece of data, or are there certain information systems that once something is in your system, anyone else in that same system automatically has access to it?
So I think there's two types of data. There is that case-specific data, and then there's aggregate data sets. We're very stingy with our data sets, I think, to the frustration of some of our partners in law enforcement and others. But a lot of the aggregate data that we maintain is also public record. So if it's public record, we share it. We share it with whoever wants it, whoever asks for it. If it's not public record, we look at each information request on an individual basis. When that request is for aggregate data or just basically a set of data that is protected, we don't share that data. Like I said, we're pretty stingy with that data.
Okay, so one system that has come up a few times, as I've been hearing from folks in the community, is CopLink. Can you tell us more about that, and how does that mean that federal immigration authorities are privy to information that BPD is using, or what exactly do you do with that system?
So we were running CopLink several years ago. We don't run it anymore. We don't share any data through CopLink.
Okay, are there similar systems that the federal government might have access to besides the kind of case-by-case incidents of national implication?
Yes, so when someone is arrested, we check their identity through the federal systems. So we send the fingerprints to a clearinghouse at the state. The state sends that to the FBI. It's our understanding that the FBI shares that broadly at the federal level, but that is that's just a regulation that we adhere to.
That's for every arrest.
Every arrest.
That's for everyone. So no one's excluded from that procedure. We treat everyone the same.
Great. And then, this is my last one for this round, I think. In terms of video, and, we've talked a lot about new technology and technologies that we might not even be able to predict, and how to put guidelines around that, but sort of traditional cameras that are either city-owned or through agreements or partnerships with local business owners or other folks in the community. It seems like that's been one tool that also has been, the use has been expanding. So what are the frameworks around that and data retention, access, et cetera?
So we maintain a network of cameras that are maintained by the police department, and then there are additional cameras that are maintained at the city level for the transportation department. Because cameras and video footage is so valuable to us for solving crimes after the fact, we record all of those cameras in the city that we have access to by agreement with those departments, but we retain that video for 30 days. If no one requests that video pursuant to an investigation or a subpoena or a public information request, then that video is deleted after 30 days.
And is there any facial recognition software being applied now or being thought about, or?
So that's a great point. So we do not apply any video analytics. We do not apply any data algorithms, any artificial intelligence to any of our data sets. In the future, we'll reevaluate that because this is emerging technology, but at this point, we think the cost outweighs the benefits as far as what it could give us and the sort of the perception and the damage it might do to public confidence.
Thank you.
Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, guys, and thank you, Councilor Wu, for some of your line of questioning, which were similar to some questions I had. Just for the sake of time, because I know we have a lot of folks who want to testify. There's another panel of folks we absolutely want to hear from. Is there a way that just the BRIC and BPD can provide the council with a list of technologies that are used for surveillance? I know we made the distinction earlier about technologies that are used for data purposes, but they may not be used for surveillance. Also, sort of the policies and what policies or what agreements does the city of Boston or the BRIC have with, whether it's the state or the federal government, where information about surveillance is being sent or at least shared in some way? I think we have an organization that's represented here that has been here before, representing some Somali youth and Muslims. They came to a budget hearing that I held previous, and I know they met with Commissioner Evans, and I want to give Commissioner Evans credit for meeting with them and listening, but I think there's still more to do in that space. But one of the programs they highlighted where we were working under a program granted by the federal government sort of pulls on us to maybe do surveillance of either Somali youth or Muslims or something in some way. If we're participating in a program, can we actually just at least articulate what programs do we participate in where we're giving or sharing data that is surveillancing people, or where we may be getting funding to do that? If we could sort of have a few of those, those three things broken down in three different lists, that would be helpful, because I think we could be here all day talking about all of the breadth of technology and not get to either the next panel or folks in the audience.
I think we can answer the federal question now. And there are no agreements, no sharing agreements, other than the regulations for identity information in the arrest process. But we don't have any agreements that we share data with the federal government.
That was a part of a rumor. That's why we're willing to educate folks that we don't associate with the government in that way at all.
If a federal investigator asks for information pursuant to an investigation and supplies sufficient documentation, to support that, we'll share data just like we would, with the state police or, the Arlington police. But we don't have any, we don't open any data, no special access.
So, but we do participate in the federal government's, I'm just going to read this, the Joint Terrorism Task
Yes.
Force.
Yes.
So we're participating in programs like this. So, for example, what does that participation mean?
So participating in the Joint Terrorism Task Force, it
Yep.
means that, so for us, Boston Police Department commits resources and personnel to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. That is a task force that is statutorily responsible for investigating acts of terrorism. So anybody that is part of that Joint Terrorism Task Force becomes an FBI task force member. Out of Boston Police Department, the deployment of those men and women come out of the Boston Regional Intelligence Center. They function under policy of the federal government, very strict policy. I mean, as far as simple terms goes, it's no different than the law enforcement policy that we operate under for Boston Police Department. There might be some different nuances to feds versus state versus local, but for the most part, it's the same thing. I will say on the record that I am not familiar with any programs that exist that are intended to violate any type of constitutional rights. What you described to me, ma'am, would, absolutely would. I'm entirely unfamiliar with anything like that, and I just don't think that anything like that would ever exist.
So just for the sake of time, and David, no, I hear you. I think
Yeah.
every policy, right, is intended to not be discriminatory, not to have a disparate impact on certain communities of color, but sometimes it shows up differently in practice for our citizens. And so folks have come forward to say certain policies or the way in which we monitor certain folks is having a negative impact on their community.
Yes.
And so we, of course, want to make sure that we're listening to those folks and then making adjustments in any way. So I think what would be helpful to me from this space is just having a sense of where BPD shows up in surveillance programs. So, for example, with the task force, you're working with the federal government around terrorism. Obviously very important. What other spaces do we show up in with our state and the federal government in partnership, whether it's a task force, whether it is some other policy or smaller task force, maybe for a short period of time, we participate, then we leave. What does that programming look like?
Sure. So I
And you
think
don't
that-
have to say that all
no,
now, but I
yeah,
think-
I think that's part of a larger conversation that would involve the commissioner and other members
That's
of our
right,
leadership.
that's right.
But what I will say is when I hear the term surveillance, surveillance activity, the majority of the time, and I mean the vast majority of the time, is going to happen under the careful, strict guidance of a court-issued warrant, which means that a judge has been convinced that there is enough probable cause there to actually use invasive types of technology. And what I wanted to try to get across in my opening statements here is that the amount of times that is what is going on, surveillance is slim to none. It's a misconception.
So the list would still be helpful.
Yes,
Because
so
I
we
think
can-
at the end of the day, it still
absolutely.
informs us so that we
Sure.
can have a more meaningful conversation
course.
with our constituents. And frankly, not just rely on one group of folks to say, this is what we do, another group of folks, including some of our directors, this is what we do. But having a list of a starting place would be helpful, particularly as we think about how we develop an ordinance or policy or something that governs all of these three different things, whether it's surveillance technology or technology technology that's being used to gather information, data collection, technology being used for that purpose, whether it's in small businesses or our street lights, traffic, whatever it is, it'd be nice to have a list so that we're all on the same page when developing a policy to govern this, and also defining the role that council and other departments could play in making sure that the community is aware of what's happening.
Yes, ma'am.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you very much, Counselor. Counselor Edwards.
Again, and thank you for sticking around. So I just want to be very clear about what I think this hearing is about and what it's not. And we heard a lot of testimony about how much some of my colleagues trust you, or that they trust your perspective and your experience. And I just, this hearing is not about that. It's also not about, I feel, victims who are suffering and who naturally would want any kind of resource to make sure that the person who caused them to suffer or caused the loss of their son, child, or whomever, to be apprehended with the best technology. That's not what this is about today. And it's not necessarily about the effectiveness of the technology that you have. It's not about how good the shot, what is it called, works.
Spotter.
Yeah, it's not about that. It's about when you are going to watch us, how we can watch you. And I just wanted to make sure, because I don't want this to be a debate about how awesome you are or how great those things will be, or whether they're going to cost us anything.
Just answering the question.
I understand that, but I guess I'm just putting it out there that because in your answer, your first answer to me demonstrated that you and I are on the same page.
Yes.
Which is that you agree that
I
we
do.
should be able to watch and consent how we're watched by the Boston Police Department.
Nothing should be hidden.
So my follow-up question to you as a direct one is, how soon can we start? So we have a budget coming up. We'll be voting on it, actually. And would you be able to get us a list of all of your technology, all of your databases, and all of the ways in which you are currently sharing our information to us before we vote on that budget? Would you be able to do that?
We can definitely talk about that. I have to consult the commissioner.
So-
Yes,
so-
that's
no.
a yes. We don't hide anything.
No.
It's your money that we purchase technology with, so yes.
Right. No. So, because I think that instead of us having to maybe go through the rigmarole of an ordinance, which we ultimately should, if there's already willingness on your part and there's already commitment from you right now today to do to share that information and to make sure that we ultimately can see it before it happens, your current technology and what you hope to also implement, I would love a list of that, but again, the data sharing and your databases as well, before we vote on the budget. Is that possible?
And just for the record, I do have to include the commissioner in this discussion. I know some people may have taken issue with that. That's the way it is.
I didn't see that they took issue with it. I think they did.
But yes, and before that, the counselor asked me a question, and I was just answering it.
Absolutely.
But we have
And I-
nothing to hide. And
No,
these
and
are
I
the
think-
words from the commissioner. We're transparent, and we're looking forward to having that discussion with you. That's all I'm
Right,
trying
and
to say.
again, I think I wanted to make sure that the discussion was not about your character or whether you had something to hide. Just strictly, when you are going to be watching me, that I
Right.
know what you're watching me with, and I see where my money's going. And I just want that to be the black and white question. And I'm so happy, again, that you committed to saying yes, that when it comes to how you're watching us, that you do agree that we should have approval at the city council level, and that ultimately, I think we're going to get there. So again, I appreciate your again, making yourselves available. I appreciate your honest, transparent answers, but I didn't want us to be distracted by those other topics.
Thank you very much. So that concludes panel number one. I want to thank the chief and your staff for coming. I
Thank you.
appreciate the in-depth introduction. It means a lot. We'll certainly be having working sessions in the future.
I hope so.
And we'll continue to work together on the Social Justice Task Force and all the other things, and we certainly appreciate you coming here. So that'll be the end of panel one. Thanks so much
Okay.
for being here.
We'll
And the second,
make room for you.
the second panel is Cade Crawford and Ben Green.
There's two others,
Okay.
but I don't have the names.
Nikhil and Jamie also.
Who are they?
Nikhil, okay, Nikhil, is Jamie with you? Yep.
We're not doing that. Welcome, everybody.
Can we take a little bit of testimony before this panel? Or it's up to
Why don't we just get, yeah, why don't we just blow this through this first thing? Thanks for coming, everybody, for panel number 2. If you could just introduce yourself, your affiliation, and opening statement would be great. Thanks.
My name is Jamie Kennedy. I come from a nonprofit organization called Bikes Not Bombs that uses the bicycle as a vehicle for social change, and we're here for social justice and what's right.
Thank you, Jamie.
McMillan. I'm a community leader. I'm also the founder of Maxos.
Hi, my name is Ben Green. I'm a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard.
Hi, folks. My name is Kate Crockford. I am the director of the Technology for Liberty program at the ACLU of Massachusetts, and I really am appreciative of all the work that you all have done to get this hearing together, and especially for the folks who stayed to hear our testimony. Thank you. So we should jump right in, yeah?
Yep.
Do you want to start, Mike?
Yeah,
First, thank you to the city council. Again, my name is Michael McMillan. I'm also a community activist and also a resident of Brownlee Heath. And so I just want to share a little bit of the story about the police technology. So I wrote it down. Good afternoon. My name is Michael McMillan. I'm a resident of Major Haley Apartments and the founder of Maxos, Inc. Today, I stand in front of the city council in hopes of passing an ordinance to require community control over surveillance technology. Last summer in July 2017, residents in the Mildred Haley Apartments alerted myself of a drone sighting in the common area of the community. On that particular day, there was a lot of residents outside that day cooking out kids in the park, a typical sunny afternoon. The residents in the community were concerned because nobody could figure out who was controlling the drone flying above. What is it doing? What is it taking? Is it taking photos? Was it recording conversations? What was the purpose? Questions we had, but nobody knew the answers to. Later on that evening, as I began walking home, I had spotted 2 police vehicles in the Lennox Martell parking lot across from the Mildred Haley Apartments. There were 2 officers outside the establishment testing the drone. After a few seconds, it all clicked. The drone the residents had seen flying inside the Mildred Haley Apartments were being controlled by the Boston Police Department. As a resident of Brownlee and also a voice for the community, I found it strange that the police didn't tell the city or community residents that they were going to be testing or using drones in and around the communities. Especially if Boston City Department doesn't have communities of color's best interests at heart. Aware of the situation at hand, I was able to get in touch with Cade over at ACLU, who was able to dig deeper into the rabbit hole. Nearly 2 months later, the Boston Globe did a report about the drones. The department spent nearly $17,500 on 3 drones and related equipment over a 3-month period. But what was more startling was the answers from the PR people to individuals in the police department. Spokeswoman for Marty J. Walsh said no sanctioned official use of drones had been permitted or conducted by the BPD. If and when the Boston Police Department uses the drones, it will be after the community engagement process. Lieutenant Michael McCarthy said it was likely 2 officers photographed were, quote, playing with a toy, adding that officers aren't authorized to use personal equipment in the performance of official duties. I believe both statements come from a place of ignorance and power. Both statements contradict myself and community. In doing so, the relationships between communities of color and Boston Police Department will continue to grow further apart. It's hard to ask for accountability, truth from communities when it shows you don't hold yourself or the department to the same standards. As a body's and Boston City Council President Michelle Wu had no knowledge of the police department buying drones up until the reporter asked her on her thoughts. So I asked if Michelle Wu could be left out the dark and the rest of you all, what do you think happened to the city? What do you think about the residents in these cities? And then I'll leave you all with a quote by James Baldwin. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Also, I have 25 signatures from a petition supporting the ordinance Michelle Wu. So there's over 100 residents that signed, where either they're residents of the city of Boston or residents of Bromley Heath.
Do you want us to copy that? Want us to copy and then give it back?
No, I'll just hold on to them. So, and they, even doing so, there were residents who were afraid to sign off on the petition because they didn't want their names out there. They didn't want their information out there in any way being misused or mistreated by the police and any backlash. So there were residents that was afraid to come up, speak, and there was residents who were afraid to come to City Hall.
Understood. Thank you, Michael.
Go ahead, Jamie.
My name is Jamie Kennedy, as I said. And in general, I just want to voice my opinion from the perspective of being someone that is actually connected with the youth. So essentially, I'm just tired of it. I'm sad of it. I'm sick of it, and I don't mess with it. I ain't with the cops on an institutional or systematic level. No matter how good of a person you may be, the very origin of police is rooted in pain and racism that we all see today. We believe the police are not protecting and serving, rather they are intimidating and hurting our youth. I work at a nonprofit organization called Bikes Not Bombs, where we fight for social justice by using the bike as a vehicle for social change. We have a lot of youth come in from the community and inner cities who feel like prisoners in their own neighborhoods, with the level of surveillance and the ease in which police disrespect and cross basic civil boundaries. I've heard stories from our youth of kids getting hit off scooters by police, getting beaten by police, getting unlawfully searched. Boston doesn't have the best police in the world. We are just better at hiding it. There was always room for growth, and we have a sick system that needs a lot of it. The youth that I connect with at B&B, and even those that I've yet to meet, feel like family. I'm tired of our youth feeling scared by police, my family being scared of police, police feeling okay with trying to scare us. But I will show no fear, and we must rise to the occasion and be better than we were yesterday. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if people of color felt safer without the police. I've been asked by a state trooper before, when I was 10 years old, whether I had weed on me, and when I told him I didn't, he said he did not believe me. Simply because I am black with dreads. This is just one example of how they tried to put the fear in me, and an example of what goes on with so many of our youth, and why there's so much fear, and why we don't trust the police. Quote me tell me if I'm wrong on this, but around the 1700s, I believe, I found out recently that police actually started and were formed by the way of slave patrols, slave catchers. That is the origin of those we ask to protect and serve. The racism is so deeply ingrained within our system that the police are put in a position to judge others by the color of their skin. When I hear Commissioner Evans, and I believe this is true, I believe this is true, when I hear him say we target bad kids in bad neighborhoods, all I hear is we target black kids with slave origins. I, Bike Not Bombs, and Boss Cops will not stand for this. We wish to create a city, a community, where all can exist without fear of the police and trust that they are safe from being entered into gang databases, being watched by secret technology, or being killed by the police. If you don't believe there's no possibility of having peace without police presence, look at any white, privileged community in America and see just how much harassment there really is of their youth. We aspire for a place where one can feel comfortable, no matter race or color, and in its current form, from a systematic standpoint, we feel we do not need the police to do that. We want more money for the healing practices, therapy, youth programs, and all those other positive forms in our community. I have no fear, I believe in one love, and I believe in Rastafari. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, folks. Again, Cade Crockford from the ACLU. Thank you for all of you who stayed, and thanks especially to Councilors Wu, McCarthy, and Campbell for calling this hearing today. Obviously, you can see there are many, many beautiful people in this room. This is an issue that people in Boston really care about. It's an issue that brings together people from all over the city, people from different walks of life, all different colors, people of all ages, because surveillance is something that impacts everyone in the city of Boston. Obviously, it impacts us in different ways, though. So I think a lot of the testimonies that you will be reading from folks who couldn't make it here today, but who submitted written testimony, speak to some of those, especially racial inequities. we've been organizing for about a year now, talking to a lot of folks in the city of Boston, and one theme has really risen to the top, and you may have heard or actually just witnessed some of the theme yourself, which is that depending on how old you are, what neighborhood you live in, and especially the color of your skin, your perception of the Boston Police Department may be really different from someone who lives in a different neighborhood, is a different age, has a different color of skin. And I think that's really something that we as a city need to grapple with. I want to turn specifically to the subject of surveillance technology, which is obviously one of the many things that people are here talking about today. I submitted pretty voluminous written testimony, so I'm not actually going to go over a lot of that. I hope that you all will read it. But I did want to respond to a few of the things that law enforcement officials said. Unfortunately, they left. And, I think also, just generally in the city of Boston, one thing that we see a lot at hearings like this is that the police come and they speak and they talk about how much they care about the community and community's voices, and then they leave before they have a chance to actually listen to what people in the community have to say. And I just find that to be really troubling. So unfortunately, they're not here to hear what we're saying, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it's important for everyone in this space and folks watching the historical record, and of course you counselors to hear. A couple things. One, it's astonishing to me that we just heard in the middle of this hearing that the Boston Police Department doesn't use the CopLink system anymore. It's astonishing because I obtained records through a public records request that I did at my office at the ACLU from the Massachusetts State Police last year. Which contained, and I can send these documents to you all if you're interested in seeing them, a PowerPoint presentation that the Massachusetts State Police gave to its own officers, training them in how to use the CopLink system. And among those slides in that PowerPoint presentation was one that showed all the police departments in the state that contribute all of their data to CopLink, and the Boston Police was listed there. Among the records that police departments, as far as this document says, including the Boston Police, contribute to CopLink are FIOs, which stands for Field Interrogation Observation Records. Those are, a lot of people probably know that by the colloquial term stop and frisk, but oftentimes actually the police do not stop and interact with someone. It's a kind of street level surveillance program that can even happen without any interaction. So a law enforcement official may be sitting in his cruiser, sees some young people in a park and merely writes down, Jamie's hanging out with Michael, this is the time and date, this is what they're wearing, I saw them walk in the direction of the school. That is an FIO report. That gets filed in the Boston Police Department's FIO database. That is one of the types of surveillance that we're concerned about. Obviously, records obtained by the ACLU through a lawsuit a number of years ago showed that that FIO data reflects really severe racial disparities in the city of Boston. 63% of people who are FIO'd, so that includes stops, frisks, and these sort of observations that take place from afar, were black people, and black people compose 24% of the population of the city of Boston. Now, that discrepancy can't be accounted for when you look at the crime rates of those neighborhoods. So that's really troubling. Anyway, to get back to CopLink, these Massachusetts State Police records from last year clearly indicate that the Boston Police Department is contributing its data to CopLink, or at least was then, and that includes its FIO records, its incident reports, potentially mugshot data, as well as maybe, we don't know, intelligence records from the Boston Regional Intelligence Center. So I think that the fact that you all city councilors, us, taxpayers, residents, folks who live in the city of Boston, that we didn't know that the Boston Police Department, A, was contributing all of this information to CopLink, and that, news was just made in this hearing that apparently they have stopped contributing information to CopLink, I think really speaks to the need for this process and for a robust community control ordinance that not only gives the public, through the elected representatives of the city council, a clear window into the activities and the information sharing programs and the surveillance technologies that the Boston Police Department is involved in, but also gives us a voice, frankly. And that leads me to my next comment, which, well, first, I just want to say also that on the information sharing tip with ICE, the CopLink issue is actually a really important one because ICE has actual credentialed access to the Massachusetts CopLink system. So if it's true what the Massachusetts State Police said in these documents last year, that the BPD does contribute data to CopLink. That's a real problem for a Trust Act city that has committed not to engage with ICE and CBP and other federal immigration authorities, because it means that we are actively sharing huge quantities of data about people with members of those federal immigration organizations. So that really, I mean, that truly speaks to the heart of what we need to get at today, which is there's a lot of obscurity, there's a lot of opaqueness around these questions. It should not be opaque. It should not be obscure. It should be very clear to you all on the council and to us as residents of the city exactly what kinds of information BPD is collecting, how it's doing it, under what legal authorities, and who that information is getting shared with under what circumstances. So on the drones question, I think that's another issue that really highlights the reason why we are here today. You know, folks on the police department, they may have a view, and frankly, some people on the council may, and some people in the city may too, that having drones is perfectly obvious. It's something that the police department should obviously do. We just heard Superintendent Daley, when he was asked about facial recognition, say, you know, we don't use face surveillance now, but it's certainly coming down the pike. We're looking at it. That's troubling. I mean, you know, if the city of Boston uses face surveillance algorithms on all of the networked surveillance cameras that we use through the MBTA police, through the Boston police that are all over our city, again, particularly in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color, it is going to mean literally the eradication of anonymity and privacy in public. It is going to mean that government officials can rewind in time to see where you were, with whom, and when, for as long as that footage is recorded. Does that open up real possibilities for investigations and for public safety purposes? Absolutely. Does it fundamentally change the balance of power between the residents and the government in what is ostensibly an open and free society? Yeah, you betcha. And we cannot go stumbling blindly into that kind of future. We need to be very deliberate as a people, as a city of people who call ourselves free, right? We need to be very deliberate about making those choices. Those choices should not be made by bureaucrats in the police department. They should be made by elected officials who are informed by the views of their constituents. And that's exactly the problem with the drones. You know, there's now an effort on the police department's behalf to say that we should have a public process about deliberating on a policy. Great. We should have had a public process to ask the question of whether drones are right for the city of Boston before they were purchased, and only then have a conversation about what the policy looks like. And that's the process that we're asking for, to take us through all of these difficult questions. And frankly, they're just going to be more of these questions, and they're going to be more difficult. You know, technology like facial recognition is the future, certainly. And we really need to make decisions not only about how those technologies are going to be applied in our city, but whether they will be applied, right? So just a couple more things, and then I'll pass the mic to Ben. One is that I found it really troubling when David Carabin of the BRIC said that the FBI has very strict rules that govern their investigations. The fact of the matter is that after 9/11, the federal government changed the rules that govern FBI investigations, and now FBI agents, including Boston Police Department officials who are deputized as federal agents through the Joint Terrorism Task Force operations, are allowed to spy on you, rifle through your trash, look you up and your phone number up in even NSA surveillance databases, even if they do not have any reason to believe that you are involved in a crime. These are rules that are sketched out in what are called the Domestic Investigations Operations Guidelines, the DIOG, which is a set of rules that the FBI promulgates to govern its investigations. That type of investigation is what they call an assessment. I just want to be very clear that all of the post-9/11 powers that, you know, the FBI has accumulated for itself and now bestowed on local police departments through these JTTF operations have never once led to this, you know, stopping a terrorist attack. Certainly it did not stop the Boston Marathon bombing. There was no indication at all that anything BRIC did could have even stopped the Boston Marathon bombing. And I think that's actually a really important point here. The Department of Homeland Security a number of years ago funded a study that concluded that data mining So using, sort of dragnet surveillance technologies, which the BPD does, including its license plate reader technology, which does not use a warrant. David Carabin again said, we do not conduct surveillance, unless we get a warrant. Well, that's flatly not true. There are cameras all over the city that are tracking people all the time. The license plate readers track people's driving movements without warrants. It's just a factually incorrect statement. But data mining of all of these hordes of information that are collected by these new technologies, this DHS-funded study said a number of years ago, is an ineffective means of stopping terrorism. In other words, it won't. It will never stop terrorism. And the reason for that is actually pretty straightforward. With credit card reporting and credit card fraud, there's a very clear history of what credit card fraud looks like. That's why your credit card company can use an algorithm effectively to identify what look like, risky or unusual purchases. And then they, turn your card off and they call you and say, we think that somebody might have stolen your card. Terrorism is not like that. With terrorism, there's no one path that, there's no pattern that you can see through someone's communications records or through someone's records of what they bought and where they went and who they were with, because thankfully it's an incredibly rare act and there is no pattern. The FBI has acknowledged that as much. 2 blue ribbon presidential commissions commissioned by President Obama after the Snowden revelations confirmed that all of the NSA's dragnet surveillance programs never once amounted to any useful intelligence in terms of stopping either domestic or international terrorism. So the idea that the Boston Police Department would be able to stop terrorism using all of this surveillance data that the NSA cannot, I find to be a stretch. So I'll just say one more thing, which is that as far as the Boston Police Department's own rules pertaining to what it can do with the information that it collects about us, I really urge the council through this process to take a very close look at those rules. The Boston Regional Intelligence Center, the Fusion Center that David Carabin runs, is all of the data that they collect is governed by what they call a privacy policy, which to me is a strange name for it because it really provides very little, if no, privacy protections for the people who are monitored by folks at the BRIC using their technology. Specifically, it, like the FBI's assessment power, authorizes BRIC and folks who work there to conduct investigations of people even when they are not suspected of any criminal activity. That is a real problem. In a free society, the government should not be in your business if it doesn't have a really good reason, right? And so that policy ought to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. If we're having a really great conversation, but the snapping is becoming a bit distracting. We're all on the same team here. We're trying to move forward. So let's just act like adults and we'll go on. Ben, welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to the City Council for holding this hearing, everyone who's out here listening to it, and especially to my fellow panelists for being part of this conversation. This hearing could not be timelier. New technologies massively expand the government's ability to watch over the public. And whether we recognize it or not, the technologies we implement today will play a significant role in defining the social contract of the next century. For the past several years, I have studied how local governments across the country acquire and use new technology, but I've been focused in Boston. I even had the fortune to work here in City Hall for a year as part of the Department of Innovation on Technology. And on many accounts, Boston is at the forefront of the movement towards what many people call smart cities. But when it comes to taking responsible steps to protect privacy, Boston has fallen behind. While cities like Seattle and Oakland have passed wide-ranging ordinances that govern the municipal use of surveillance technology, Boston has failed to act. Yet, enacting the surveillance ordinances that provide transparency and public oversight of new technology is, in my mind, the most important step that we can take to ensure that the cities of the 21st century promote liberty and equity. It is urgent that Boston develop policies that comprehensively account for what surveillance means today. Failing to account broadly for today's realities of surveillance and the forms of surveillance coming down the road in the future will render a surveillance ordinance impotent. I urge the Council in particular to make sure that we emphasize surveillance technology and in particular surveillance software in addition to simply surveillance equipment. We can learn, for example, from Seattle, which initially limited its surveillance ordinance to purchases of new equipment and did not cover software. Yet under the terms of this bill, the Seattle police were able to use Geophedia, a software service that collects and analyzes social media data, without notifying the public. And given that the Boston Police Department similarly has used Geophedia for several years in the past without notifying even City Council, it's clear that we are prone to repeat the mistakes of Seattle if we do not proactively emphasize technology writ large as our focus and not focus solely on equipment. It's also essential that public oversight be applied to the policies that govern surveillance technology. The ordinance must allow the public to collectively shape the answers to 3 central questions. Number 1, how will the data be used? The ordinance must cover algorithms that analyze the data collected by surveillance equipment or scraped from social media feeds, or any algorithms that eventually get put in place for this purpose. From Geophedia to predictive policing algorithms, the practice of surveillance today often relies more on machine learning algorithms that can be inaccurate and biased rather than solely on the collection of data itself. Number 2, where will the data go and who will have access to it? Given the egregious abuses of human rights being perpetrated right now by ICE, we must ensure that any data collected by the City of Boston cannot find its way into the hands of federal law enforcement. And number 3, how will the technology evolve? We need to future-proof the surveillance ordinance and require public oversight of software updates that alter a technology's capabilities for surveillance. Otherwise, a technology approved in one form or perhaps not even considered surveillance technology when purchased can evolve into a tool for unwarranted surveillance as its software is updated. For example, body camera manufacturers are developing facial recognition software, which could fundamentally change body cameras into a far more pervasive tool for surveillance and allow police to track people's movements and identify individuals in crowds. I applaud the City Council's initiative in holding this hearing and the public's showing up in such large numbers here today. Ultimately, this is not a debate about being for or against innovation or technology. It's about facilitating the innovation that city residents want and most need. After all, being a smart city means more than just using technology wherever possible. It means being smart enough to accomplish our policy goals with the aid of technology, but without violating public expectations or rights. By working to enforce stronger public oversight of surveillance technology, Boston can help ensure that new technology is deployed in accordance with its residents' values and improves daily life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that information. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, and thank all of you for being here, and thank you for your testimony. I didn't take down any names, but I just wrote down the number. You had 25 signatures, and was it 25? 95. 95. That's why I asked. So I appreciate your advocacy, and I appreciate you garnering support for this. I know your organization so well. I used to represent young people at the Ed Law Project and YAD, and we often would get clients from you guys or send them to you. So thank you for the work that you do for our young people that usually doesn't go recognized. Ben, thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. And Kate, thank you for the continued advocacy. I have to run to I'm a keynote at a program in Roxbury, actually, with folks addressing violence in our community, and actually we're honoring those folks who do it every single day. So I have to run to that. But obviously we've made it clear that this has to be a series of conversations to get to a policy that we put forth before the council and that we seek votes on. We've been talking about this for a little while now, so I'm excited to be a part of this, to move this forward, not to waste any more time. To the extent we get the list of technology, surveillance technology, and other things to us, we can happily share that with all of you, so we're all on the same page about the scope of the issue and how we address it. I will add one of the things that did not come up today in as much detail as it probably should have is the way in which we are monitoring our students. So I used to represent students in our schools, and a lot of discipline cases, special needs cases, are sometimes a combination of both. And these are young people that are arrested in the schools, and of course that information goes somewhere. And for young people who are in fear of possibly being deported, we're finding out that this information may not be being used in a good way. And so there were folks here that wanted to acknowledge that Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights left some very incredible evidence that we need to do better. So that, of course, has to continue to be a part of the conversation as well, especially given what's coming out of Washington and what we're seeing in the southern states and the border states. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And Alejandra, thank you for the work that you do for our constituents on behalf of the city of Boston. But I wanted to acknowledge that because this is also a big piece of what we're talking about. So consider me a partner in the work. I am all for developing an actual written policy that ensures that there is a process that governs this and that makes room for this idea that there's always going to be new technology. And of course, none of it is to say that we don't want the department to have the best tools to solve crimes in the city of Boston, but how do we strike that balance? And I think we've done that well with some technology, but most of it probably not. So I'm excited to be a partner in this work. Thank you, guys. And thank you to Councilor Wu and Councilor McCarthy, who are also partners in this. And I think this is a powerful picture here, too. We got women, but we also have Councilor McCarthy. We love you, Councilor McCarthy. And I'll say that we often don't acknowledge, where people are so excited. The Boston City Council, 6 women, whoopee. But, we have male colleagues who care about this, too, who live in different parts of the city, were born and raised in the city, who know it impacts certain people in a different way based on either their age, their race. And so I appreciate your partnership in this work as well. So thank you, guys. And thank you to all the folks who showed up. I will look at public testimony online. The stuff is recorded. And I do pay attention to it, so thank you, guys. And one of my team members is also here to watch the whole hearing, so thank you, guys.
Thanks, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Wu?
Thank you, and thank you, Madam President. Thank you. I want to thank, especially Kate and Ben. You've devoted your life's work to this now, and I've learned so much, and especially to Michael and Jamie, who, as volunteers and community members, are coming forward and sharing your stories and your perspectives and your advice. And we know that you are here in this seat as an individual, but bringing with you the experiences and stories of many people, even beyond your 95, of those who are willing to sign. So I guess my question is on getting to the point where we're talking about language of an ordinance, because it seemed that there was pretty good consensus that folks were willing to engage and move on to next steps. So either generally, what do you think should go into an ordinance? And then in particular, if you're familiar, particularly if you've looked at other cities, are there bits within the ACLU's model oversight ordinance that you think Boston should tweak, or how do you feel about that as a starting point?
Well, I work for the ACLU. I think it's great. I think the ACLU ordinance is great. I do think at the same time that, we've heard a lot of issues, folks that we've talked to over the past year when we've been base building and, going out into different parts of the community to speak to young people and people all over the city about what concerns them with respect to surveillance and policing. And we've heard a lot that goes, frankly, beyond issues related to oversight of technology specifically. We've heard, a lot about the gang database. I think Councilor Campbell was just referencing, how information can sort of leak into the hands of ICE and how that can end up getting folks deported. So, I think that the ACLU model ordinance is certainly a good starting point. There have been communities, as Ben said, from Oakland, California to Seattle, Washington, even Tennessee, the community in Tennessee passed an ordinance like that. Cambridge, Massachusetts is very close right now to passing one that's pretty similar to the ACLU model. But also Providence, Rhode Island has, after about 5 years of a strong push from a huge coalition of youth and youth of color, queer youth of color organizers in Providence, were able to pass a really comprehensive, much broader ordinance that deals with technology and the policies that govern the technology, but also includes new limits on how law enforcement can identify young people as gang affiliated, grants young people access to information about themselves when it's held by the police, grants people the power to ask for a receipt when they get stopped by the police that says why they were stopped. And so those are things that we're looking at too. Obviously the sausage making process is complicated and there are going to be a lot of voices involved, but I don't necessarily want to limit ourselves only to the subject of technology merely because we've heard overwhelmingly from folks all across the city that while that is an incredibly important issue, there are a number of other issues that folks are concerned about as well.
And I would just briefly add a couple points. One, that sort of as Cade mentioned, we're sort of fortunate here in the sense that many other cities do have these ordinances, and so we can have a lot of language to draw on. We're not starting from scratch in terms of at least getting a first draft and something to work off of. But I think, as I mentioned, it's really important that we make sure that any bill really thinks about technology very broadly defined and doesn't just think about one particular type of equipment or one particular type of algorithm, but thinks about technology as an ongoing process of use and acquisition and development that evolves often pretty rapidly and in many ways can be seemingly out of the city's hands, as it might, be a development that a technology manufacturer makes. So we need to think about how are we making contracts with vendors of body cameras or other surveillance equipment and technology, and how do we make sure that even as that technology evolves from their prerogative and their business interests, that we're not stumbling down a path of towards surveillance that we never intended to get into in the first place, and we're not able to control how we use the technology as it develops. And even thinking about our use of databases, how we're managing databases, that's an incredibly important form of technology. Many cities we're seeing have these gang databases. It sounds like Boston is included in that, and often those, are not from some dragnet surveillance technology that's tracking everyone in the street, but is coming from these FIO, these sort of manual interactions that are happening on the street, and those are getting built up over time into a massive database that then can be used for all sorts of surveillance and proactive law enforcement. So we need to think about that just as much as a surveillance technology as cameras and sensors in the street.
Thank you very much. I have just one quick question to Cade. In your opening statement, you talked about the relationship between the local police, ICE, FBI, state troopers even. What's the relationship with Providence? Do you know into that at all? I mean, I can do my own research, but if you know, then save me some time.
Whether or not Providence is on the JCTF and things like that. Yeah, I think they are. I'm not sure that the Providence ordinance addressed that. I'd have to look at it again, but I can get back to you on that for sure.
Yeah, no problem. I can do the homework.
Okay.
No problem. Thanks very much. I appreciate everybody coming. And Bikes Not Bombs, I've been working with you guys since 1997 when I ran the Summer Jobs program. So it's a couple years. So you guys really do good work. So thanks very much for for coming here. So we do have a large amount of people who want to speak. We're going to keep it tight. I've got my phone out with my little alarm clock here. So what we're going to do is we'll give everybody about a minute and a half, and then I'll give you a little, maybe I'll tap the mic a little bit or give you a wave, and then we want to kind of wrap it up because there's a lot of people who want to speak. We want to hear from everybody who waited and had the patience to wait. So I'm going to call, we have two stations to speak at. We have a station here and a station there. You can line up any way you want. What I'll do is I'll call out a bunch of names, so we'll get in the queue, and that way we can just kind of roll right through. And again, the rules are please give your name and your affiliation, your address, not your address, but your town you live in and your affiliation, and you can get right into your testimony. So, yep. Oh, Matt Krieger's gone. Okay. So, and if you're not here, then you won't be in line, apparently. So we're gonna start. We'll have Judy, Fatima, Mallory, Liza, Joe, and Ben. Joe, I know, I should have said that. Joe Cadillac. There's only one Joe Cadillac. I already read your testimony. You have to read fast. I read your testimony. You get that in under a minute. That's amazing. Can you do it? All right. All right. Well, we might as well have fun while we're here. And then Valeria and Fior and Jennifer and Alex and Taylor. All right. So we get all lined up, and when you're ready, let her rip.
All right. Hello, my name is Fatima Ahmed. I live in Grove Hall, and I also work at the Muslim Justice League. This is separate from our written testimony that we submitted. I'm here today because I work with many Somali youth who fear repercussions if they speak their truth about how they are policed. When asked about their interactions with the police, the youth have said that they encounter police in every part of their day, whether watching them in school as they study, monitoring them from an unmarked car as they walk home, and showing up in their after-school activities through countering violent extremism or CVE programs. The CVE program that the Boston Police Department is participating in, called Youth and Police Initiative Plus, assumes that local Somali youth need to spend time with officers because they are all on a path to violence, and somehow a dialogue with officers would change that. It says, and I quote, "A key tenet of the training is that underneath the antipathy and mistrust youth have for police, there's also a curious attraction to their power and ability to use it. They are enticed by their capacity to carry weapons, their loyalty, and almost gang-like dress code," end quote. I doubt that the participating youth are shown that quote or know that this is funded by the Department of Homeland Security. When youth do read about this program, they've asked, why can't we get $500,000 for our community to use it as we'd like, for, say, a community center, rather than a law enforcement program that assumes we're all attracted to violence? As someone who used to develop technology, I know that the impact of technology is dependent on the users. So as someone who witnesses the police harassing my neighbors on Humboldt Ave regularly, and knowing that in 2016, 70% of the people in BPD stop and frisks were Black, I know that any technology they access will increase the racial and religious profiling we already experience. That's why we're not just talking about technology today, because surveillance means any kind of monitoring done by law enforcement, with or without the assistance of technology. We deserve to know all of the technology, including equipment and software, as well as practices of monitoring the community that BPD uses, rather than finding out after the fact that they flew drones in Jamaica Plain, that they surveilled social media profiles for Muslim terms and hashtag Black Lives Matter. Residents deserve to know if they are in a gang database and how to get out of it, and we deserve resources that are not tied to law enforcement and an assumption that we're all potential criminals. We deserve to move freely through school, on our streets, and access social services with dignity. As a resident of Dorchester, I would like to see the City of Boston pass an ordinance regulating the BPD by instituting explicit policies to end racial profiling, prohibit participating in CVE-style programs, end the gang database, and preventing any future purchase or use of weapons and technology without an accessible public process that engages communities of color. A meaningful next step would be to provide an inventory of all current equipment, software, information sharing practices, and policies for conducting field interrogation and observations from both the Boston Police Department and the Boston Regional Intelligence Center.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Chairman McCarthy, committee members, and city councilors, thank you for your time today. I'd like to talk to you about the surveillance equipment that the city of Boston is planning on using. My name is Joe Cadillac. I'm a Dorchester resident and a former private investigator. I'm here today because I'm concerned about the potential infringement and privacy violations and civil liberties by law enforcement. The Boston Police Community CamShare program being piloted in Dorchester and the Boston Police License Plate Reader program should have residents, business owners, and elected officials concerned about their privacy. Police CamShare programs often start out as innocuous by asking businesses to volunteer into the program. But as a case that I mentioned earlier, or I should say that I have here, in February of 2018 in Saginaw, Michigan, it went from voluntary to mandatory when the Saginaw City Council passed an ordinance forcing businesses to purchase and install cameras at cost to businesses. The Boston City Council has been working to make it easier for businesses to operate in Boston, but the BPD's Community CamShare program and License Plate Reader program will have the opposite effect, especially when you combine the Boston Transportation Department's and State Police License Plate Reader programs together. All of these programs, License Plate Readers programs, can and are being shared without a warrant by police departments across the country. Business owners may find a drop in visitors in sales as tourists and residents realize that they are under constant citywide surveillance. Last month, the Boston Globe revealed that the BPD started their license plate program, or restarted their license plate program again, a program that Commissioner Evans said we were collecting so much data that we weren't even sure what we were collecting, honestly. That statement there alone is cause for concern. We should be working to reduce crime in neighborhoods such as Dorchester by involving the community in a meaningful way, instead of having the Boston Regional Intelligence Center, which is funded by DHS, running a citywide surveillance program. Boston is a sanctuary city, so we need to act like one, not add to the growing fear of our large immigrant and refugee community. BRIC previously ran a social media surveillance program without authorization from this body. What is to stop them or any other agency from doing that in the future? I urge the City Council to create an oversight committee made up of residents, privacy advocates, and community leaders to protect our citizens' civil rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm 0 for 2, keeping people under 2 minutes, so here we go. Yes, sir.
Yes. My name is Mark Irvich. Liza Berent had to leave. She asked me to read her testimony on behalf of the organization Jewish Voice for Peace, Boston. There's a well-documented right-wing strategy of pitting U.S. Jews against people of color based on a false and hateful narrative that Muslim, Arab, and Black Americans pose a threat to Jewish safety. But we know that Boston's Jewish community is multiracial and in deep relationship with our Muslim neighbors. Jewish safety is interconnected with the safety of all Bostonians. And as a white Jew, I'm called to speak out for my friends and family of color, whether they are Jewish, Muslim, or otherwise. We are concerned about BPD's power to stop, surveil, record, track, and share information about residents, and we support the right of communities of color to control what surveillance policies and technologies impact them. I want to highlight the impact of racist policing on Muslim Bostonians, particularly Black Muslims. BPD participates in a federal countering violent extremism program that claims to prevent radicalization, but actually discriminates against and surveils Muslim communities. BPD's program is called Youth and Police Initiative Plus, YPIP, and it targets Somali young people, relying on debunked theories that normal religious practices or adolescent behaviors are precursors to committing acts of violence. BPD also participates in federal investigations with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Current BPD policy allows people to be under surveillance and investigation even if they are not suspected of any crime. Programs like YPIP, JTTF, BRIC, and the HANG database are restrict religious expression, worsen harassment of marginalized communities, suppress open dialogue and dissent, and do nothing to advance public safety. We ask the Council to pass an ordinance regulating BPD's purchases and practices related to surveillance technology that will protect the rights, privacy, and dignity of all residents. We also ask the Council to force BPD to end the participation in YPIP, the JTTF, the Gang database, and any other program that unfairly targets Boston's communities of color. Thank you.
All right. I'm 0 for 3. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Hello, my name is Fiora Pena, and I live in the South End. I am a rising junior at the John D. O'Brien High School and the leader of the SIM chapter at my school. After joining SIM, it has been brought to my attention about what the Boston Police Department has been doing, spending thousands of dollars on surveillance technology. They use the information against people of color and report any suspicions to ICE. As an immigrant living in a community of color, I fear living a peaceful life. I have to be worrying about who's watching me and my info getting leaked to ICE. Them using the BRIC system to their advantage, even monitoring what colors we wear. I always see polices where I live watching over everyone and sometimes targeting a person of color just for hanging outside with their friends. It is an invasion of our privacy and we don't like it. Today I am here sacrificing my study time for final exam to share my testimony. I shouldn't be worried on who's watching me. I feel like Winston from the book 1984 because Big Brother is watching. Thank you.
Took the O'Brien School to step up on time. I like it. Nice job. Thank you very much for your testimony. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Jagba. I go to the John D. O'Brien School. I'm a rising junior. I'm here today because I feel like this cause is very important to me. I noticed that a lot of things are happening around my neighborhood. I live in Grove Hall. Like police officers would come in my buildings and stuff like that, and they'll walk up and down and stuff like that. And they say that they're trying to keep us safe, but it's nothing's happening. So I don't understand as to why this is happening consistently. And I have a porch, so it's late at night, and they'll be walking up and down my street and stuff like that. And I always wonder what's going on, but they never really tell me anything. They're just they're just doing what they feel like is best in the neighborhood. And also, like, you know, the summer's coming up, and a lot of kids of my age and stuff like that, we like to hang out in the city and stuff like that. And I notice, like, when we're in a big group, there's always like people watching us, like the police is watching us, or they're harassing us, or they want to break us up because we're in a big group. But then it's like when there's like suburban kids or like kids that are white, they don't do that to them. They don't ask them questions. They don't watch them when they're in the malls or in the stores, or they don't make them feel uncomfortable. And I feel like this is a big issue, because it's like, if you are watching us, then the people who are in the stores are going to be watching us. And then it's like, we don't want to shop there. And they're going to have, like, you know, adding on to the stereotypes. And I just feel like budget cuts are happening with the schools and stuff like that. Why are we spending so much money on, like, stuff surveilling us instead of putting it towards schools where it's more important and stuff like that? And I also feel like, you know, like, schooling is important to us. What do you want? Do you want people to watch us, or do you want us to get a good education? Like, we already don't have a lot of resources. Education is the only thing that can get us out of here. And I feel like that's really important. And I thought, like, you know, the United States is supposed to be a democracy, not a dictatorship. And it just feels like if you're going to be watching us, watch us to be respectful, to actually help us, but not to just, like, control us and, like, act like we're caged animals. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. Thank you for everyone who stayed again. My name is Valeria DeVale. I am the director of the Student Immigrant Movement, here representing, hopefully, the undocumented population to the extent and as appropriate as it could be. I myself am a DACA holder, and this issue matters to me a lot. As we know that, as Cade mentioned before, there is no truth behind the fact that ICE is not getting hold of information produced by BPD. In any case, as you've heard from a lot of the community members here today, it's not just about the technology that's being used, it's about the person-to-person connection or person-to-person contact. And by that I mean the cop to an everyday civilian walking in the street or driving a car or wherever they may be. And I heard over and over again about the importance of safety in our city, and I agree 100%, it's about safety. But I think the issue then becomes if only one side feels safe, and by that I mean the cops. There is an issue when the cops are the one who feels safe, and the community is the ones that don't feel safe and feel that their rights and civil liberties are being threatened. Particularly, I think that I'm concerned when they mentioned over and over again how great their technology is. I don't think that's the case, and as they mentioned before, ShotSpotter is unreliable. In fact, it doesn't just pick up shots, it picks a lot of things up. We talked about how this is a matter of protecting the community, specifically women's rights, but as a survivor of sexual assault who had to deal with BPD as an undocumented woman, I feel that my case was never held in the way that it should have, and I do not feel like my rights are being protected, and so I would have many questions for them about that. In particular, I'm also a little bit concerned that I hear over and over again how the community is being heard and how they're talking to the community. But when I am talking to the community, I'm talking to the moms who are talking about their sons and seeing their sons on the ground being held by BPD and then told, oh, you can go, you're the wrong person. I'm concerned about that. And I'm also concerned about this idea that our misconceptions of technology and how BPD is holding our community safe comes from our vision of what Hollywood is or what we see on TV, and not the fact that we are living these experiences every single day and that we are here talking about them. That is what I'm concerned about today, and I hope that we can address. I know you have the evidence from the lawyer about a police report written in the school that was then submitted directly to BRIC, which we did not hear from the gentleman who spoke about BRIC. But I know my time is up, unfortunately, but I am the community, and I'm here speaking today, and I hope that more of us will be heard. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your testimony. Yes. We have two stations, so you can just get in line either side is fine. Thank you.
Hi, counselors. My name is Sabrina Barroso. Like Valeria, I am here trying to represent the undocumented community here in Boston. So I'm a lead organizer for the student immigrant movement, and as y'all can imagine, organizers encounter the community a lot, 'cause that's our job. So just briefly, I would like to share how much more difficult my job has become because of BPD and because of the shared information that's being transferred to ICE, right? When we talk about young people in Boston, we're talking about a bunch of people. We're talking about immigrants, and we're talking about folks who might not have status, folks who have been told that their DACA is going to be taken from them, folks who have lost TPS, right? And we're talking about folks who are in vulnerable positions. We're also talking about students that we are supposed to be taking care of, young people that we are supposed to be taking care of. I take my job quite seriously, well, very, very seriously. And so I remember actually seeing, I believe to see, or I thought I saw actually Councilor McCarthy at the unveiling for the mural at BCLA. And that was amazing work done by the chapter and the students and the parents and the teachers who cared about a young person there who had been detained by fault of the process that BPD and ICE let happen, and BRIC. And we hold those people accountable because that person lost 4 months of their life in a cell here in Massachusetts. And that is unacceptable. And we know that that is not the only case. We know that there are more problems, and that's why we're here today to talk about passing this ordinance to make sure that if BPD or if any other type of law enforcement is surveilling us, that we have full control and say over what and how that looks like. So I could keep going on. I know my time has passed, but I mean, y'all have all those written testimonies there to go through and hear more. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much. That mural at BCLA will be there forever. So it's something that will always remind those students, and from the students that aren't even there yet, that there was a stand made there. So that was awesome. Thanks for being there. Yes, sir.
My name is John Buxton. I live in Fenway, member very proudly of the ACLU. My comments now are about your running of public meetings. If you notice, only the two of you remain to hear the public's comments. If you notice, the police representatives are not here to hear the public's comments. You know that it's very important to have a public hearing, not so that the police department can make a infomercial statement, not so that counselors can provide feedback to them about how proud we are of our police force. That can be done in some kind of a celebration of the police department. Those police officers should be here to listen to what the public has to say. Your council members should be here to hear what the public has to say. And I ask you, please change the public hearing process so that you have statements made in advance. We can watch them on TV or on our phones, and then have the council members and the police here when the public testifies. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mallory Honora, and I live in Dorchester, and I work for an organization called Families for Justice as Healing. And to be honest, I'm really here as a resident. So I just want to acknowledge all the residents that are here. I'm so grateful for you and your opinions and your thoughts and your feedback. And we had to push to even have this hearing, so we're grateful that it's happened. And a lot of us have lived through dozens of times of Boston Police brass walking out on us when we were asked to come and give feedback. So the frustration levels are really high at this point, especially about something that's so important. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not a technologist. I work my computer and my smartphone decently, but when I think about surveillance in Boston, what I think about is detective cars circling blocks, watching black and brown families sitting on their porches. I think about squad cars posted all night, only in some neighborhoods, their blue lights bouncing off of bedrooms' walls, making it difficult to sleep at night. I think about gang unit cops in hats and hoodies with guns in their cargo shorts, following people around in unmarked cars. I think about the same plainclothes cops walking up on my neighbors of color and asking them who they are, what they're doing, and where they're going without probable cause to do so. often searching or photographing them. I think about young people that I've known who don't feel comfortable waiting at bus stops where they know cops bother them. I think about the way that you can tell which Washington Street you're on by how many cameras you can count. I think about the constant presence of cops outside hospitals, treatment facilities, and shelters among people who need healthcare and housing, not police harassment. So when we're coming to you with broader concerns than simply what technology police can purchase and use, that's where our demands are coming from. And this face of BPD may be unfamiliar to white students or white residents of Back Bay or Beacon Hill. We even heard the officer talk about the Women's March. And it's not the face of BPD we see on social media, but for residents of Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, there are literally only seconds between the time we leave our house and the time we see the first police officer, and steps between our door and a surveillance camera. So my time is up, but I want to join my neighbors in demanding an ordinance that regulates the BPD by instituting explicit policies to end racial profiling, ending the gang database, frankly, ending the gang unit itself, I think would be a good step, and prohibiting overtime spending and preventing any future purchase or use of weapons and technology without an accessible public process that centers communities of color. Thank you.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, councilors Wu, McCarthy, of course, Campbell, and all the other councilors that were here asking the important questions of our officers. My name is Shakia Scott. I'm here as a resident today. I'm also the co-founder of BPCAT, or the Boston Police Camera Action Team, who basically forced a community process onto BPD in regard to implementing body cameras and having a policy that is for the community. So that's what I want to touch on today. And thank you guys for being open to developing a policy to govern this. However, I think that it's important to note that as long as you have a process, we have to make sure that when it comes down to implementing the actual tool, that the policy that outlines the implementation of the tool itself is actually the policy that we care about. Because we saw with the camera program, the pilot program, that the policy left out two of the most major accountability actions that the community asked for. One of those were, if you violate the policy, you have specific disciplinary actions that will apply to you. However, in the policy for the body camera pilot, the section of disciplinary action was one sentence that said no officers will be punished for minor infractions of this policy. However, we didn't know what the minor infractions were or what those disciplinary actions were that would follow. So we just have to make sure that when we are implementing policy to overall govern this, that we're making sure that we're paying attention as well to the policy that governs the tool itself, and that those policies have measures in them to hold the officers and the departments accountable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, councilors. Chairman McCarthy. My name is Taylor Campbell. I am a volunteer for Restore the Fourth, a Fourth Amendment advocacy group. I also volunteer for the Mass Bail Fund, where I often see people who have received the brunt of the criminal justice system, who will be most subject, no doubt, to the whatever surveillance tools are available to the police. I think it's, I'd also wish everyone a happy Juneteenth. I think it's appropriate that we discuss the powers of the successor to the slave patrols on Juneteenth, the powers of the police departments. And going a little more recent history, the representative of the Boston Regional Intelligence Center claimed that everything that BRIC collects is subject to judicial review and probable cause and warrants and so on. But we've learned from past public records requests that BRIC has actually opened files on even sitting Boston City councilors who were, for example, organizing talks on anti-war issues. There is certainly no probable cause of any sort of criminal activity in that. In fact, it's fairly clear that BRIC doesn't even have a requirement for a criminal predicate to open to record data. Now, oh dear. Okay, so I'd like to quickly add about Some people mentioned budget issues, and it's very easy to say that the police are using the tools that the Boston has bought, so of course the City of Boston should have a say on that, but I want to caution that not all of this comes from Boston's money. A lot of the surveillance technologies that the police have access to are from Department of Homeland Security grants, which Boston has no say over, and from business models such as Amazon or Axon, formerly known as Taser, who provide, for example, body cameras to police departments free of charge in exchange for the data. So it's really important to study not just where does the money come from, but or the specific things that the Boston police get, like the cameras, but how do the data actually get used by the companies that are providing these? And I guess I'm out of time, so I should stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, councilors. How are you all doing?
Good to see you again.
Great to see you as well. My name is Anthony Thomas. I'm just coming as a life resident of Boston. I support and urge the City Council to create an ordinance that will regulate the Boston Police Department's purchase and use of surveillance technology. It is important, like the ACLU mentioned on their website, it's important to protect privacy, civil liberties, and the democratic process by mandating transparency, public oversight, and the City Council approval of BPD surveillance programs. It is important that the process is transparent so the public is fully informed and engaged in a conversation about what police departments are doing and why. As a young male who has been under surveillance, I understand the impacts of being under surveillance and under watch, overwatch, and disparately and disproportionately arrested. It is imperative while implementing new technology that it does not continue to widen the gaps of success in community public relations, community police relations. That's pretty much all I got to say. It's very important that we work together on this with the police and not allow them to just, completely take this on themselves. If in order for it to be done responsibly and done well, I believe it needs to be an all hands on deck effort, because I know too well the impacts of when it's not done well. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Always a pleasure seeing you.
Always.
So there are a couple people that I had called out that aren't here. So this is where I say if you'd like to speak, you may. If you do not want to speak, you can forever hold your peace. If you do want to speak, jump right on up, and we'll take you in order as fast as you get to the microphone. And
Hi, good afternoon, councilors. My mother grew up on Harrison Avenue. I live in the Leather District at 107 South Street, sandwiched between Chinatown and South Station. And I fully understand the need to have a robust effort, vigorous effort to protect the public safety. But I also think in a democracy that it is the role of our legislators or our elected representatives and the courts to set limits and checks and balances, as was previously mentioned, on unrestrained police powers. And there's a couple of things. I mean, we're on the cusp of tremendous and invasive, potentially invasive technologies. And I want you to think of two things, hopefully, when we get an ordinance, and I think that an ordinance is a good thing and would be a very good thing, and we should do that, is that there are scales to justice. That's the symbol of justice. And there is the consent of the governed. And it's something that I'd like to keep, I hope you can keep in mind when you're deliberating these issues. Thank you so much for your time today.
thank you very much. Would anybody else like to speak on this docket before we wrap it up? Come on, hurry up. You want to wrap up?
So my name is Taylor Campbell again, and I'd like to add one point about the surveillance ordinances and specifically what should go into them. There's a very important part of a surveillance ordinance is a private right of action to enable the people who are affected by the surveillance to pursue lawsuits in court. To obtain some sort of recourse about it. The courts have in the past held without any legislation to support a private right of action in, for example, Clapper versus Amnesty International, that if the defendant can't conclusively show that there was a specific harm arising from the surveillance, then they have no standing to sue. The ordinances in Davis, Oakland, Berkeley, and the ones under consideration in Cambridge, although it's still under discussion, do have private rights of action. And this is a very important thing to put in, especially considering the comments people made about how this is not about the trustworthiness of individual police, any individual city councilors. It's about establishing an institution that consistently protects the people's civil liberties. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. So on behalf of Councilor Wu and Councilor Campbell and myself, I want to thank everybody for hanging in there for a long time. And I want to thank all my other councilors who are here. And just for the record, trying to herd 13 councilors together for a hearing is always tough, with graduations and birthdays and parties and keynote speakers and other things. But I will tell you from experience of working with the other 12 councilors, they work awfully hard, and they watch these films. They'll be at the working sessions. They'll add their 2 cents. They'll be calling their constituents and getting feedback, and this is a great body to work with. So I do want to just make that statement for the record. So on behalf of Michelle Wu and Councilor Campbell, this is docket number 0264. It's an order for a hearing regarding the usage of surveillance equipment in the city of Boston. This hearing is adjourned.